movies, read the books, but the lived reality was something else entirely. The gleaming longships, the Fey warriors with their horned helmets, persistent yet utterly false. Hollywood embellishment, sagas of conquest, these are the echoes that linger in our collective consciousness. But history, as it often does, gritty, unvarnished truth over polished myth. Imagine yourself not as a triumphant raider, someone caught in their unforgiving path. Forget the heroic bollard. This is the stark, terrifying bollard of survival, a realization, a brutal awakening from the romantic slumber of modern interpretation. The air, the scent of salt and wood smoke, suddenly carries a new, acrid tang fear. The rhythmic creak of timbers, a comforting sound of maritime life, now becomes a harbinger of dread. The world you know, the familiar rhythm of your village, about to be violently disrupted. As the seasons change, so too does the landscape of fear. You stand on the shore of your village, on the island of Holy Island, off the coast of Northumberland. It is the 8th of June, 793 AD. The sun, cast sky, casts a weak light on the grey, choppy waters of the North Sea. The salt spray kisses your face, sharp, carrying the distant, mournful cry of gulls. Your rough-spun wool tunic, woven from the wool of your own sheep, clammy against your skin, a stark contrast to the warmth you'd expect from the summer air. The scent of drying fish, your diet, mingles with the earthy aroma of damp soil and the fainter, sweeter perfume of wild thyme growing between the stones of your simple dwelling. You are Eadfrith, a fisherman, and your life has always followed a predictable, if sometimes challenging, course. Today, however, the sea has brought something far more terrifying than any storm. A shadow vast and dark detaches itself from the horizon. A cloud, nor the familiar outline of a trading vessel. It's a fleet, long, slender ships, prows slicing through the waves like predatory beasts. The rhythmic splash of oars, growing louder, more insistent, replaces the gentle lapping of the tide. A collective gasp ripples through the villagers gathered on the shore, faces etched with disbelief, and then a dawning horror. The men, your neighbors, clutch their crude fishing spears and farming tools. Fling, the women pull their children closer, their eyes wide with primal fear. The air, moments ago filled with the everyday sounds of village life, the bleating of sheep, the distant clang of a smithy, of conversation, is now dominated by the rising crescendo of terror. You remember the hushed whispers from traders who had ventured further north, tales of fierce warriors from the lands of the Norsemen, sailed from the shadowy realms of Scandinavia. They spoke of swift, brutal raids, of villages plundered, of lives taken without mercy. Exaggerated seafaring yarns the kind sailors spun to impress those who stayed safely on land. Now, the stories have arrived on your doorstep, their truth a chilling, undeniable reality. The lead ship grounds on the shingle beach with a grinding thud that echoes in your bones. Figures, clad in leather and mail, onto the shore. Their beards are long and often braided, their eyes hard and sharp, scanning the terrified faces before them. Swords, axes, and round shields, their movements fluid and predatory. The guttural shouts, a language you don't understand, are filled with aggression. You can smell them now, a potent mix of sweat, leather, and something metallic, the scent of their own blood from previous encounters. They're here, whispers a left Jifu, your neighbor, her voice barely audible, calloused from years of spinning wool, clutch a wooden cross hanging from her neck. The heathens. You nod, your throat dry. Your own hands, usually steady when mending nets, shake uncontrollably. You grip your fishing spear, its sharpened point feeling pathetically inadequate against the gleaming steel you see. never known violence beyond a drunken brawl or a territorial dispute with a neighboring farm. This is something else. The Vikings surge forward, a wave of brutal efficiency gives way to a desperate scramble for survival. Some villagers flee towards the relative safety of the monastery, sanctuary. Others, like yourself, are caught in the open, directly in the path of the invaders, the sickening thud of weapons meeting flesh with screams of pain and terror, the scent of blood, coppery and sharp, to overpower the familiar smells of the shore. I discovered in the archives of Durham Cathedral, centuries later, monastic chroniclers described this very event. They wrote of the desecration of the holy place being dragged from their prayers and slaughtered, of sacred relics being defiled. The sheer brutality, compunction for the sacred, was a shock even to their medieval sensibilities. The Vikings, they were often called in England, were not merely warriors, they were agents of chaos, designed to instill terror and extract wealth. They targeted monasteries not just for their riches, as symbols of the established order, striking at the heart of Christian society. You see a man, a fellow villager, fall. His crude spear is knocked aside by a massive axe. The Viking warrior, a giant of a man with a wild glint in his eyes, doesn't pause. He moves on, leaving his victim to bleed out on the sand. The sound of the waves, once a soothing murmur, now seems to mock the chaos, a rhythm, a stark contrast to the broken, gasping breaths of the dying. The cold spray continues to fall, a chilling baptism into a new, terrifying reality. As the initial onslaught subsides, behind a scene of devastation, you find yourself miraculously unharmed, huddled behind an overturned fishing boat, now systematically looting the village, their shouts of triumph mingling with the cries of the wounded. The smell of burning wood begins to suffocating layer to the already thick atmosphere of fear and smoke. Thud of stolen goods, the heavy thud of treasures being loaded onto their ships. Your own home, a small, thatched cottage, is now a target. You can see figures ransacking it, their rough hands tearing through your meager possessions. You glance at your hands again, still shaking, but a different kind of resolve begins to flicker within you. This is not a story you can simply read or watch. Your village, your very existence under threat. The romanticized image of the Viking warrior, the noble barbarian, completely replaced by the stark, brutal reality of a predator. You are no longer Eadfrith the fisherman, Eadfrith the potential survivor. The question now is not if you will face them, but how. The scent of the sea, the salt, the blood, and now the fire is the scent of your new world. The sun, as if sensing the shift, the clouds for a fleeting moment, casting a stark, unforgiving light on the devastation. It illuminates the longships, now catching the wind, ready to depart with their spoils. But for those left behind, the true ordeal has just begun. The sounds of the raid are fading, replaced by the crackling of flames and the mournful cries of the injured. Of the sea continues, indifferent to the human tragedy unfolding on its shores. But for you, Eadfrith, the sea has brought a change that will forever alter the rhythm of your life. The next tide will bring not just fish, need to rebuild, to remember, and perhaps to resist. Imagine waking up in an era where your biggest worry wasn't Wi-Fi connectivity. The gnawing hunger in your stomach would be sated before nightfall. The soft texture beneath your cheek isn't Egyptian cotton, but rough, spun wool, infused with the lingering scent of wood smoke and something vaguely animalistic. You blink your eyes open, and the muted, of a tallow candle does little to dispel the encroaching darkness of the small, timber-framed dwelling. The air is thick, the smell of damp earth, stale beer, and the distinct, metallic tang of unwashed bodies. A low murmur of guttural voices drifts in from beyond the crudely hewn wooden door. This isn't a dream, this is your new reality, a jarring, cross centuries. Your initial disorientation gives way to a wave of panic. You, with your degree in Renaissance literature and your proficiency in Sordu starters, are utterly, unequivocally unprepared. That defined your existence, navigating spreadsheets, crafting eloquent emails, assembling IK furniture, are as useful here as a solar-powered calculator in a blizzard. Your hands to the smooth glass of a smartphone screen, clumsy and useless as you tentatively touch the rough weave of the tunic you're now wearing. It's itchy, of sheep and sweat, a far cry from your ethically sourced organic cotton tees. You try to recall the exact moment of transition, the bewildering flash of light, the disembodied voice that had whispered, "Welcome." It felt like a cosmic prank, a cruel joke played by a bored deity. You'd laughed it off initially, realistic dream. Now the cold, hard truth seeps into your bones. Experience becomes your teacher, brutal. The first few days are a blur of fear and confusion. You're in a small settlement, nestled beside a churning that you suspect might be the Thames, though you can't be sure. The year you eventually glean from hushed conversations is 8071 AD. This is Wessex, and the air is thick with the threat of Norsemen. The people around you, weathered and grim, eye you with a mixture of suspicion and pity. They speak a language that's a distant, nizable ancestor of your own, forcing you to rely on gestures and desperate, broken attempts at communication. A first attempt at a conversation is with a woman named Ilos, with her hands calloused and stained from years of labor. The village reeve. A man named Adric, whose silence is as imposing as his broad shoulders. A Loswith exterior offers you a small bowl of pottage, a surprisingly hearty stew of barley, root vegetables. Scraps of meat could be scavenged. The taste is earthy, perhaps a little bland. Provides is a welcome sensation. You lost. Glasworth asks, her words heavily accented, syllable a deliberate effort. She points a finger towards the horizon, then makes a sweeping motion with her hand. You nod vigorously. Helplessness. Yes. Lost. Very lost. You mime being adrift at sea, a gesture that seems to resonate with her. She then points to yourself, then to the tunic, and makes a gesture of weaving. You weave. You shake your head frantically. No, I write books. The concept of writing, of literature, seems utterly alien to her. Her brow furrows and she shakes her head, exasperation in her eyes. Books no good here. Need hands for this. She holds up her own, the strength and dexterity required to work with rough materials. I discovered in archives that weaving was a fundamental skill for Anglo-Saxon women, essential for creating clothing, sails, tapestries that depicted important stories. Your inability to perform such a basic task immediately marks you as an outsider. Your internal monologue is a constant stream of self-recrimination. Why didn't I pay attention in that history documentary? Why did I skip that chapter on medieval crafts? You're a walking, talking anachronism, a fragile bloom in a thorny, unforgiving landscape. Sensibilities clash violently with the harsh realities of Viking-era life. The casual acceptance of violence, pervasive stench of unwashed bodies, the sheer physical exertion required for survival, it's all overwhelming. Architecture of the village is a testament to practicality over aesthetics. Huts are constructed from wattle and daub, woven branches plastered with a mixture of mud, clay, straw, thatched roofs that leak when it rains. The central longhouse, where the more important families reside, is larger. Timber frame more robust, but still primitive by your standards. You spend your nights huddled on a straw-filled pallet, wool blanket scratching at your skin, listening to the wind howl outside and the occasional snort or grunt of sleeping villagers. The silence of the night is punctuated by the distant howl of a wolf, a sound that sends shivers down your spine. Fear is a constant companion, a bitter aftertaste to the meager meals you receive. One afternoon, as you're attempting to help lay low-Swiss pound grain with a heavy stone pestle, a task that leaves your arms aching and your hands blistered, a group of warriors returns. Rudimentary, mostly leather and mail, their shields emblazoned with crude designs. They carry spears and axes, grin and etched with the wariness of travel. They speak in a language that's even more alien than the local dialect, a harsh that sends a fresh wave of dread through you. These are the Norsemen, the very reason for the fear that permeates the air. Overhear a hushed conversation between Edric and one of the warriors, a burly man with a braided beard and a scarred face named Jorn, in a surprisingly clear, though heavily accented, form of Old English. The Danes, they press hard. Edric, Jorn grunts, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. King Alfred rallies his forces, but the threat is constant. Another raid is likely. South of here, near Londonwick, Edric nods, his face a mask of concern. We have little to offer. Our harvest was poor. Bay Jorn spits on the ground. Little enough, but every able body counts, even our scribe. He glances at you, narrowing with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. You feel a surge of adrenaline. Could I be useful? Could I, with my brain, contribute something? You take a tentative step forward. I can read and write. You remember that Latin was still a scholarly language used by the clergy. Jorn raises an eyebrow. Latin. Axig. Edric surprisingly intervenes. He may have a different kind of strength. Jorn. The movements of the enemy. Perhaps his scribblings can tell us something. A.B. Jorn shrugs, unconvinced. He's just another mouth to feed. But if he can decipher something, perhaps. He turns to you, scribe. If you are useful, you eat. If you are not, food. The bluntness of his statement is chilling, but it's also a sliver of hope. Your ability to read and write, a source of intellectual pride, might now be your only currency for survival. The threat of a Viking raid, a distant historical concept, is now a tangible, terrifying possibility, with a jolt that your survival hinges not on your strength or skill with a blade, ability to adapt and find value in the most unexpected of your modern abilities. The scent of the wood smoke clinging to your clothes, the rough feel of the wool against your skin, the distant cry of a seabird. These are the constant reminders of your new reality. As the sun dips below the horizon, sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, the coming days will test you in ways you could never have imagined. Your journey into this brutal, beautiful past has only just begun, and the knowledge you possess, however seemingly useless, key to navigating the storm that is about to break. The next dawn will bring its own challenges. You'll need to discover if your intellect can truly be a weapon in a world that values brute force. History settles gently on your shoulders as our story begins. You are Elara, a young woman living in a small coastal settlement in Northumbria, England, in the year of our Lord 793. The air, carrying the briny tang of the North Sea, and the earthy scent of damp peat from the surrounding fens, peculiar stillness, a hushed anticipation that prickles the skin. The sun, a pale disk behind a thin veil of clouds, on the thatched roofs of your village, a cluster of sturdy wooden dwellings with wattle and daub walls close to the shore, your hands rough from daily chores, churning butter, mending nets. Small garden plot behind your family's home are currently occupied with weaving flax into linen. Scrape of the loom, a familiar lullaby, is the only sound that dares to break the growing silence. The rhythm of life changes as a guttural shout pierces the air, raw and laced with a terror you've never heard before. The usual call of a fisherman returning with his catch, or the jovial cry of children at play. This is a sound of pure, tid fear. Your head snaps up, the shuttle falling from your grasp and clattering onto the packed earth floor, leaps into your throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The sea, usually a source of sustenance and a familiar presence, suddenly feels vast and menacing. You stand, your simple woolen tunic rustling, towards the open doorway of your home. The scent of wood smoke, usually a comforting aroma, now seems thin, the metallic tang of dread that's beginning to permeate everything. Outside, chaos erupts. Villagers spill from their homes, faces contorted with disbelief and terror. Old Thomas, the village elder, his beard as white as sea foam, trembling finger towards the horizon. "By the Holy Rood," he croaks, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Is this?" You follow his gaze. And then you see them, emerging from the mist, poets stark against the pale sky, are long, sleek shapes, dragon-proud. Their carved heads seem to snarl at the very air. Ships, not the merchant vessels you occasionally glimpsed, their sails broad and square, but something far more sinister. These are war canoes built for speed and destruction. The rhythmic creak of oars, a sound that should be mundane, sounds like the snapping of bone. The distant shouts grow louder, more distinct, guttural. Cries that send a shiver down your spine. Your breath catches. This is not a story whispered by traveling monks. This is real. I remember poring over ancient chronicles in the archives of Lindisfarne Priory, ink speaking of the devastating raid on the monastery in 793. The monks had no defenses, no warning. They were scholars, men of God, and the raiders, the Norsemen, were a force of nature, their ferocity legendary. The date, June 8th, 793, into the historical record, a stark reminder of the vulnerability of even the most sacred places, of life changes as the first longship grounds itself on the shingle beach, head seeming to rise from the waves like a monstrous sea serpent. A ramp slams down, in leather and iron begin to pour out. They are tall, broad-shouldered men, their faces often scarred, hard and glinting. The air fills with the clang of metal on metal, swords being drawn, axes being hefted. The shouts are no longer just cries of terror from your fellow villagers, they are the triumphant roars of the attackers. Your neighbor, a woman known for her stoic resilience, grabs your arm, her grip like a vise. "Alara, we must hide!" she hisses, wide with a primal fear that mirrors your own. Her hands, usually steady as she kneads dough, are shaking uncontrollably. Shawl, a comforting splash of color, now seems like a beacon to the approaching danger. You look around at your village, your home. Loving hands offering shelter from the elements now feels like a fragile husk. The small wooden church, its bells silent, no sanctuary. The communal well, the heart of your daily life, is now a potential trap. Your mind races, fear and instinct. Where do you go? What do you do? Of survival are not taught in woven patterns or cooking fires. They are etched in the very marrow of existence. You are about to learn in the most brutal way imaginable. The rhythm of life changes as the first Viking warrior, with beads, his shield emblazoned with a raven, strides onto the sand. He carries a fearsome axe, its edge glinting, something in a language you don't understand, a harsh, guttural tongue that sounds like the grinding of stones, the scattering villagers with a predatory gleam in his eyes. This is not a skirmish, this is a conquest. This is the dawn of a new, terrifying era where the familiar rhythms of your life are about to be shattered by the thunderous arrival of the Northmen. The sheer shock and awe these raids instilled, it wasn't just the violence, but the suddenness. Peered from the sea, out of the mists, striking with a speed and ferocity that left communities utterly unprepared. Territorial wars fought on land, which had established rules of engagement. These were lightning strikes, instill maximum terror, and extract maximum plunder. It's a stark contrast to how we anticipate threats today. We have radar, instant communication. In 793, the horizon offered no such warnings, only the vast, indifferent sea. Your father, fisherman with hands as calloused as barnacles, appears at the doorway, his face grim. Alara Agnes, get back inside! He shouts, his voice strained. He holds a simple fishing spear, a pathetic defense against the onslaught. You see the fear in his eyes, a fear you've never witnessed before, and it chills you to the bone. He's a man who has faced storms, wrestled with the sea, but this is a different kind of battle. The rhythmic chanting of the attackers, a primal war song, louder, a chilling soundtrack to the unfolding horror. You can smell the salt spray mingled with the acrid scent of sweat and something metallic blood. The sand beneath your feet, firm and cool, feels strangely yielding, as if the very earth is trembling. Changes as the first screams echo from the far end of the village. Guttural shouts of the raiders are punctuated by the desperate cries of your neighbors. You can hear the splintering of wood, the terrified bleating of livestock. The air, once still, is now filled with a cacophony of terror. Shake as you reach for the wooden bar to secure your door, your mind a whirlwind of what ifs and how could this be. This is not a game. This is the raw, brutal reality of survival. You are no longer Elara the Weaver, you are Elara the Survivor, into a world that has suddenly become a terrifying, unpredictable battlefield. The question is no longer if you can survive a Viking raid, but how, and the answer, you suspect, found in actions you never imagined you were capable of. Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to truly experience life in this distant time, to feel the rough wool of a tunic against your skin, smell the wood smoke curling from thatched roofs, to hear the lowing of cattle and the distant bleating of sheep. A profound yearning, a whisper from the past that calls to us across the centuries. We, in our hyper-connected world, romanticize these eras, picturing idyllic scenes of pastoral bliss, but the reality, as we are beginning to understand, was far more nuanced and often far more precarious. Part 3 brought us face to face with the terrifying, brutal reality of a Viking raid, violent eruption that shattered the fragile peace. Now, to truly grasp the impact of that violence, first understand what was so brutally taken, we must step back into the heart of the Anglo-Saxon village, ourselves in the quiet, everyday rhythms of life before the storm. Passage of time reveals a tapestry woven with the threads of routine and resilience. Imagine yourself waking not to an alarm clock. First hesitant rays of dawn filtering through the gaps in your wattle and daub walls. The air, even indoors, distinct scent of damp earth and the lingering aroma of last night's hearth fire, a comforting earthy perfume. You stretch, the coarse linen of your sleeping tunic rustling against your skin. Outside the village of Euphorwick, or what we now know as York, it's the year 866 AD, a time when England is a patchwork of kingdoms. The Vikings are no longer just distant rumblings, but a palpable threat on the horizon. Yet, within the protective palisade of this thriving settlement, life continues, testament to the human spirit's ability to find normalcy even in the shadow of danger. Your bare feet touch the cool earth floor of your dwelling. The structure itself is simple, building with walls made from woven branches, plastered with a mixture of clay, straw, animal dung, a surprisingly effective insulator. The roof, thick with thatch, keeps out the rain and snow. Central hearth is the heart of the home, its smoky tendrils finding their way out through a hole in the roof. Around you, the sounds of family begin to awaken a child's sleepy murmur, the clatter of wooden bowls, of a woman preparing the morning meal. Stepping outside, the morning air is crisp, scent of dew, laden grass, and the ever-present aroma of wood smoke. The village is a cluster of these dwellings, interspersed with animal pens and perhaps a communal longhouse. You see your neighbours emerging, etched with the marks of daily toil, but also with a certain quiet contentment. Edgeith, her hair neatly braided and tucked beneath a simple linen coif, is already tending to her chickens, their clucking a familiar, reassuring sound. Her husband Sinric, a skilled woodworker, is sharpening his axe, the rhythmic, a shing of steel on stone a constant. In the village soundscape, "Good morning, Elf Jifu," Edgeith calls out, her voice warm and clear. "Little one sleep well." You nod, pulling your woolen cloak tighter. Thank the Lord, he was restless for a while, but settled in the end. And any eggs to share? Edgeith smiles, a genuine crinkling of the eyes. A few. The hens are more generous on days like these. Come join me for a moment before the day's work truly begins. You walk over, squishing slightly beneath your worn leather shoes. The chickens, a mix of breeds likely descended from wild jungle fowl. At the ground, their feathers are dull brown and grey. You accept a warm, rough, shelled egg from Edgeith, seeping into your chilled hands. This is the essence of their life, simple, communal, connected to the land and to each other. The passage of time reveals the daily occupations. Sinric might be heading to the communal workshop where tools are shared and skills honed. He'll be working on furniture, perhaps a new chest for a wedding dowry, or mending farming implements. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, a powerful, resonant sound, soon join the chorus of the village. The women will be busy with spinning wool, weaving cloth on their upright looms, a painstaking process that could take days to produce a single length of fabric. The vibrant dyes, made from plants like weld for yellow and madder for red, would have added splashes of colour to their otherwise earthy garments. In archives, that the quality of weaving was a significant indicator of wealth and status, finer threads and more intricate patterns signifying higher social standing. The midday meal would be simple pottage, grains like barley and oats, vegetables from the communal garden, and perhaps a bit of salted meat or fish if available. The taste would be hearty, filling, and nourishing. You'd eat from wooden trenchers, them clean with your knife, a personal item, carried by everyone, used for everything from cutting food to self-defense. Aspect of meals, even if eaten separately, fostered a sense of unity. Children would be playing, echoing through the village, their games often mimicking the skills they would later need: hunting, building, fighting. Time reveals the underlying anxieties. While the village of Euphorwick, being a more established settlement, might have some defences, many smaller villages were far more vulnerable. accounts of raids where entire communities were wiped out, the inhabitants either killed or carried off into slavery. The Vikings, called in this region, were not just raiders, they were also traders, explorers, and settlers. Their longships, shipbuilding, could navigate treacherous seas and shallow rivers, bringing them deep into the heart of Anglo-Saxon territory. Of their arrival was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of daily life, a fear that could erupt into stark terror in an instant. Begins its descent, casting long shadows across the village. The sounds of activity begin to wane. Fires are banked, and families gather once more. The air grows cooler, carrying the damp scent of evening. You might sit by the hearth to stories told by elders, or perhaps a traveling gleeman might be present, entertaining with songs and tales of heroes, reinforcing the values and history of their people. It's a moment of peace, of reflection, a fragile calm before the inevitable cycle of another day, and a stark reminder of what is at stake. This peaceful existence of daily life is precisely what the approaching storm threatens to obliterate. Safety and predictability of this life, so different from our own, makes the impending violence all the more devastating. Passage of time reveals the stark contrast that awaits. Tomorrow, the rhythm might be broken, sounds replaced by the roar of fury and the screams of terror. The skills honed for building and farming will be useless against the sharpened steel of a Viking axe. Warmth of the hearth will be extinguished by the flames of destruction. This peaceful existence, this everyday life, the crucible in which the true horror of the raid will be understood. It is the foundation upon which the question, "Surve a vikingage raid?" is built, and the answer, as we shall soon see, is a chillingly simple one for most. Of this life, the predictable cadence of dawn and dusk will soon be shattered. Familiar scents of wood smoke and damp earth will be overwhelmed by the acrid smell of burning and the metallic tang of blood. The sounds of laughter and work will be drowned out by the clash of steel and the cries of the vanquished. This is the world that existed before the fury descended, the world that is so easily forgotten in the drama of the raid itself. It is this world so full of life and quiet purpose that we must remember as we prepare to face the storm. Smartphone weighs more than some of the most precious possessions of this era. Think about that for a moment. The sleek glass and metal rectangle in your pocket, capable of connecting you to a global network of information and entertainment of unimaginable power, perhaps even magic to someone living in 9th century Mercia. The sheer density of its technology, precision of its manufacture, intricate circuitry within it's a testament to millennia of innovation that our hypothetical time traveler, dropped unceremoniously into this world, would find utterly baffling. This isn't just about weight, it's about the gulf in understanding between your reality and theirs. They might possess a finely crafted bronze brooch, a sturdy woolen tunic, honed iron sickle, objects of immense value and utility in their daily lives, utterly dwarfed by the technological marvel you carry. Contrast highlights the fundamental limitations and opportunities of the medieval landscape. Your survival, find yourself here, wouldn't hinge on your ability to craft a flint arrowhead, though that would be useful. Understanding of the world as it was, its rhythms, its dangers, and its subtle, often brutal realities. The very air you breathe would feel different, thicker with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and livestock devoid of the sterile aromas of modernity. The sounds would be a symphony of nature and human labor, the lowing of cattle, the rhythmic thud of an axe, bleating of sheep, the murmur of voices speaking a language both familiar and alien, teach you that the landscape itself is a living, breathing entity, shaped by human hands, but ultimately governed by the unforgiving cycles of nature. Imagine the village of Londonwick, bank of the Thames, not the bustling metropolis it would become, but a collection of timber-framed buildings with thatched roofs, warmth and protection. The houses, often built with wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, clay, straw, between a framework of woven branches, would feel rough and cool to the touch, dimly lit by the flickering glow of tallow candles or oil lamps. The smell of smoke from the hearth, present aroma of cooking food, and the earthy scent of dried herbs hanging from the rafters would fill your nostrils. Outside would be a mix of packed earth and straw, churned by the hooves of horses and oxen. In the fields surrounding the settlement, you'd see the patchwork quilt of agriculture, strips of land cultivated with barley, rye, and oats, interspersed with fallow fields resting to regain their fertility. The sheer manual labor involved in farming would be staggering. A simple wooden plough would be pulled by oxen, turning over the soil with a groan and a spray of clods. The scythe, blade attached to a long handle, would be used for harvesting grain, a back-breaking task performed under the beating sun. Accustomed to the smooth, responsive surfaces of modern technology, blister and ache from the rough textures of wood, stone, and woven fibers. The coarse weave of your woolen tunic, likely dyed with natural pigments like madder for red or wood for blue, would feel scratchy against your skin. Your boots, made of thick, would be heavy and unyielding, offering protection, but little in the way of comfort. Food would be a constant concern. Typical meal might consist of pottage, a thick stew of grains and vegetables, piece of salted pork, or a few dried peas for protein. The taste would be earthy, hearty, little bland to your modern palate, accustomed to a wider range of spices and flavors. Water would be drawn from wells, a matter of constant anxiety, or from the river, its currents carrying the refuse of the village downstream. The absence of sanitation, as you know, it would be a palpable presence, a constant undercurrent of potential disease. Teach you the importance of community and hierarchy. Life revolved around the Maina, the center of power and sustenance. Perhaps a Thane loyal to King Aethoid of Merciacer would reside in a more substantial dwelling with stone foundations and a more robust timber structure. His hall would be a place of feasting, judgment, and governance. Here, witness a conversation between the reeve, the Lord's overseer, and a farmer named Adric. Adric, the reeve, a burly man with a weathered face, would say, his voice carrying the authority of his position, "Is due at the next full moon. Have you set aside enough grain from your harvest?" On Adric, hands calloused and stained with soil, would bow his head respectfully. Master Reeve, the barley yielded well this year to God and the mild spring. I have stored the portion for the king, for my family through the winter. He might then add, his brow furrowed slightly, but the wolves have been bold of late. My sheep last week, right from the fold. The reeve would nod, his eyes scanning the horizon. The woods are always a dangerous place. Edric, keep your fire burning bright at night, and speak with Oswulf, the Fletcher, new arrows for the huntsman. Perhaps he can spare a few for your defense. The months teach you that technology was ingenious and adapted to its environment. The blacksmith's forge would be a focal point of activity, clang of hammer on anvil a constant sound. Here, men like Sinric, his face streaked with soot and sweat, glowing coals, shaping iron into tools, weapons, and household implements. You might see him crafting a new plowshare, its curved blade designed to cut through the heavy soil, or perhaps mending a broken hinge for a farmer's chest. Skill would be highly valued, as iron was a precious commodity, painstakingly smelted and worked. In the archives of Lichfield, a record from 878 CE detailing the payment of a silver penny for a new axe head, significant sum for an ordinary labourer. Required to produce even the most basic metal object underscores the value placed on such items, teach you that survival, especially in the face of the Viking threat, constant negotiation with the environment and with other people, the relative peace of immersion village you might find yourself in was a fragile thing. The arrival of a longship, its dragon, headed cutting through the mist. Peace in an instant. The fear would be visceral, a primal terror that would grip your heart. The Viking warriors, carrying fearsome axes and swords, were not the romanticized figures of popular culture. They were hardened, disciplined fighters driven by a complex mix of greed, ambition, and a thirst for glory. Their raids were swift, brutal, and devastating. Modern weaponry would be useless. Your understanding of medieval tactics, or even just the basic layout of a defensible settlement, would be your only advantage. Even then, the odds would be stacked against you. Nuances of the landscape, the hidden paths, the defensible positions of fresh water would become your most valuable assets. The gentle rhythm of life, the slow passage of seasons, violently interrupted by the clang of steel and the cries of battle, teach you that understanding the past isn't just about memorizing dates and names, empathizing with the lived experiences of those who came before. As the sounds of the village begin to fade, a soft glow of the setting sun paints the sky in hues of orange and purple. You can almost feel the weight of their struggles, resilience, and their vulnerability. The next challenge, should you survive the initial shock, to understand the social structures that governed their lives, of relationships and obligations that determined who you were and what you could do. As darkness settles around you now, darkness that meant something completely different, not the comforting dimness of a bedroom or the soft twilight of a summer evening, a primal darkness thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and the unsettling tang of fear, an absolute absence of artificial light, a blackness so profound that even the faint glow of a dying ember would be a beacon. This was the darkness in which the Viking longships, those sleek predators of the sea, were born. They were not born of conquest alone. Tapestry of motivations woven from threads of ambition, necessity, and a deeply ingrained cultural code. Understand why these fearsome warriors descended upon unsuspecting shores. First, strip away the romanticized image of horned helmets and myth. By the way, 19th century opera and delve into the very heart of their society. The Viking Age, 8th to the mid-11th centuries, was a period of immense upheaval and opportunity. Scandinavia was a land of harsh winters, limited arable land, and a burgeoning population. For many young men, inheritance system where land was divided among sons, siblings often received little more than a patch of stony ground, and a desperate future was a powerful propellant pushing them towards horizons unseen. Slowly but surely began to eclipse the gnawing hunger of scarcity. The Vikings were not simply raiders, traders, and explorers as well. However, the most immediate and tangible form of wealth often came through the swift and brutal acquisition of goods. Imagine the sheer glint of silver, the gleam of gold, the shimmer of fine silks and furs. These were not just possessions, symbols of status, power, and prestige in a society where a man's worth was often measured by what he could acquire and display. Think of the monasteries like the one at Lindisfarne in 793 AD, which became targets not necessarily out of religious animosity. Repositories of precious metalwork, illuminated manuscripts adorned with gold leaf and valuable relics. The monks, unarmed and unprepared, represented an easy and immensely profitable score. The sheer audacity of such raids, at the very heart of established religious and political centers, sent shockwaves across Europe. This wasn't just about taking, it was about demonstrating power and striking fear. In my archival research, a fascinating account from a Frankish chronicler describing the terror of a raid, how the Vikings laid waste to God's church with wicked sword strokes, trod down the holy places with unholy steps, desecrated the altars with filth. The sheer disrespect for sacred spaces was as much a part of the terror as the physical violence. While a significant driver was not the sole motivation, the concept of glory, or idari, in the Viking warrior ethos, a man's reputation, his vase or steira, was paramount. To die in battle fighting bravely, honor ensuring a place in Valhalla, Odin's hall, where heroes feasted and fought eternally. A direct path to this glory. Each successful raid, each enemy vanquished, added another verse to the sagas that would be sung about them, ensuring their name lived on. Imagine the roar of the crowd at a thing assembly as a chieftain recounted tales of daring raids, of treasures plundered, and of enemies routed. These were the stories that inspired young men to take to the seas, to prove their mettle. It was a cycle of ambition and validation. This raid on Paris in 845 AD, led by Ragnar Lothbrok, while the immediate goal was undoubtedly plunder, importance of capturing and ransoming the city, and the immense prestige gained from such an audacious feat, measurable. The Franks were forced to pay a hefty ransom to the Vikings' growing military prowess and their ability to exploit political divisions. This wasn't just about loot, it was about making a name for yourself, a name that would echo through the ages. Slowly but surely, land also played a crucial role, particularly in later stages of the Viking Age. As populations grew in Scandinavia, Viking settlements were established in places like Iceland, Greenland, and eventually Vinland, North America. The need for new territories became pressing. Unlike the swift, opportunistic raids of earlier years, more organized expeditions aimed at colonization. Think of the fertile lands of England, Ireland, and Normandy. Opportunities for farming, trade, and establishing permanent settlements. The Great Heathen Army, 865 AD, wasn't just a raiding party, it was a force with the explicit intention of conquest and settlement. Kingdoms like the Danelaw in England, where Viking laws and customs prevailed, a far cry from the hit and run tactics of earlier raids. It was about building a new future, securing a legacy not just of glory, but territorial control. Imagine standing on the shores of a new land, the salty spray on your face, promise of fertile fields stretching before you, a future secured by the strength of your arms and the courage of your heart. The multifaceted reality of Viking motivation, a potent blend of immediate gain, enduring honor, the fundamental human drive for a better life, a new beginning, your hands, which now feel the smooth coolness of your modern desk, accustomed to the grip of an axe, the pull of an oar, the weight of a shield. The air you breathe, filtered and clean, would have been thick with the tang of salt, the earthy scent of damp wool, and the ever-present smoke of hearth fires. These were the sensory details that shaped the lives of those who lived in the shadow of the longships. The motivations of the Vikings, seemingly alien to our modern sensibilities, were rooted in very human desires: security, prosperity, and recognition. Understanding these drives is not about excusing their violence, but about comprehending the forces that propelled them across the waves. Contemplate these motivations. A new question begins to form, a question that will guide our next steps. You understood why they came. The next crucial step is to understand how they operated, the terrifying efficiency of their methods. Further back we go, the more we realize how much courage ordinary life required, waking not to the gentle hum of traffic or the distant chirping of birds, but to a silence so profound it presses in on your ears, rustle of straw beneath your sleeping mat, and the soft exhalations of your family nearby. The air, faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth, fills your lungs, your eyelids heavy with the deep, unburdened by electric light, slowly flutter open. The pre-dawn gloom, thick and impenetrable, is your only companion. This is Lindisfarne. The year is 793 AD, the eve of something that will shatter this tranquil existence. The chill of the stone floor seeps through the thin soles of your leather shoes as you rise. You pull on a rough-spun woolen tunic, the coarse fibers scratching gently against your skin. A simple belt cinches your waist, pouch containing a few precious coins and a whetstone. Your wife, Elswith, is already tending the small hearth into a flame that casts dancing shadows across the walls of your wattle and daub dwelling. The smell of burning peat and pungent mingles with the faint, comforting aroma of baking bread. Outside, lapping of waves against the shore is a constant, soothing melody, the heartbeat of your island home. Taste the salt spray on the air, feel the grit of sand underfoot as you walk towards the monastery. Its sturdy stone walls a symbol of faith and sanctuary. The monastery, even in these early hours, is a hive of quiet activity. Monks, shaved in tonsure, move with practiced grace, their dark wool habits blending with the shadows. The scent of incense hangs in the air, a stark contrast to the everyday smells of the village. You can hear the low murmur of chanted prayers, hypnotic sound that has echoed through these halls for generations. Abbot Edfrith, a man whose presence radiates a calm authority, is overseeing the preparation of the day's offerings. His hands, years of prayer and labor, carefully arrange polished silver chalices and intricately carved wooden reliquaries on the altar. You feel a sense of peace here, a deep-seated security that comes from living a life guided by divine order. Suddenly, a sound cuts through the morning stillness, a sound utterly alien and terrifying. It's a high-pitched, piercing shriek, guttural roar that seems to rip through the very fabric of the air. Your head snaps up, your heart, leaping into your throat, drops the wooden spoon she was holding. Its clatter against the stone floor, echoing the sudden dread that grips you. Chanting from the monastery falters, then ceases altogether. A wave of confused murmuring sweeps through the village. Is it the sea, whipped into a frenzy by an unnatural storm? No, this is different. This is the sound of something wrong. Rush to the narrow opening of your dwelling, peering out into the growing light. The sea, usually a placid blue, is now a churning, and on its surface, unlike anything you have ever seen, are monstrous longships. Their dragon-headed prows, vibrant, menacing colors, slice through the waves like predatory beasts. Oars, hundreds of them, into a frenzy, propelling these vessels towards your shores with terrifying speed. The shrieks you heard were not of the wind, Men with wild hair, clad in leather and mail, their eyes burning with a ferocity that chills you to the bone. The first wave of terror washes over you, cold and paralyzing. These are not traders, not pilgrims. These are warriors. The stories whispered in hushed tones of raiders from the north, the Norsemen, the Vikings, are no longer just tales. They are here, with the clang of metal on metal, the screams of those caught unprepared, the guttural shouts of the attackers. Your peaceful island, your sanctuary, is being violated in the most brutal way imaginable. Your hands shake as you reach for the small, tipped spear leaning against the wall, a tool for hunting, not for war. Elswith grabs your arm with a fear you've never seen before. "You must go, husband!" she whispers, her voice trembling. "Take the children." You look at your two young sons, their faces pale with confusion and terror, clinging to their mother. The instinct to protect and fight wars with the primal urge to flee. With a certainty that chills you to the marrow. Spear is no match for the axes and swords you can now see glinting in the hands of the approaching warriors. You remember the tales of their ferocity, their ruthlessness. The Danes, as some call them, are not here for tribute, plunder, for violence. A group of Vikings, their faces smeared with war paint, their long beards braided. They wield broad axes, their blades glinting wickedly. One of them, a hulking brute with a scarred face, kicks open the door of your neighbor's dwelling. The screams that erupt are short, sharp, and cut off abruptly. Your stomach churns. This is not a dream. This is a nightmare made flesh. Go. Elswith urges, pushing you towards the back of your dwelling. Cliffs. They will not look there. The caves, a network of small, sea-worn caverns known only to a few. Desperate hope. You grab your sons, their small bodies rigid with fear, and pull them out into the chaos. Is thick with the stench of burning thatch and the coppery tang of fresh blood. The once familiar sounds of village life, the bleating of sheep, the clucking of hens, of children, are replaced by a symphony of horror. You see men, women, and children scattering in every direction. Some trying to fight, most trying to escape. The monks, caught in the open, are being cut down. Just robes offering no protection against the brutal efficiency of the Viking weapons. You recall a lesson from your youth by the village elder. In times of great danger, the forest and the sea are your allies. Itself can be your shield. The caves, carved by the relentless sea, are your only chance. You run, pounding against your ribs like a trapped bird, your son's small hands clutched tightly in yours. Their fear is a tangible burden. You can feel the heat of the flames licking at the sky. The triumphant roars of the attackers echoing across the island as days blur into weeks. This day will forever be etched into your mind. The shock, the sheer terror of witnessing the complete annihilation of your peaceful existence. You realize, with a crushing finality, required for this life was not just in enduring hardship, but in facing an unimaginable, sudden violence that could shatter everything in an instant. The question gnaws at you, a cold, persistent fears. Could you survive this? You need to reach the caves. The path is strewn with debris, with the fallen. The smell of smoke is overwhelming. Rough shouts, their laughter, a chilling sound that promises only destruction, is a blur of motion behind you. Grim determination as she tries to guide their younger daughter away from the main path. Your own survival of your children, now depends on your ability to move unseen, unheard. Trust in the ancient knowledge of your island home. The sea, which has always been your lifeblood, now brings death. Now rely on the earth, on its hidden places to offer you a sliver of hope. The immediate, brutal reality of the raid has begun, for mere survival has commenced. Tonight, we're going to experience history, not from textbooks, but from the inside. We've walked through the quiet, ordered lives of the early medieval period, felt the chill of the encroaching darkness, and heard the first whispers of the approaching storm. Part 7 brought us to the very precipice of chaos, as the long ships of the Northmen, those fearsome warriors from across the sea, made landfall. We saw the initial shock, horror, as the reality of the raid, not a skirmish, but a brutal invasion, slammed into the unsuspecting inhabitants of this coastal settlement. The air, filled with the mundane sounds of daily life, the bleating of sheep, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, prayers from the nearby oratory, was now ripped asunder by the guttural roars of attackers and the piercing shrieks of the terrified. The first desperate, uncoordinated attempts at defense, the raw instinct to survive overriding any semblance of training or strategy. This is where the true test begins, where the veneer of civilization is stripped away and the primal urge to live or to flee takes hold. You begin to understand the sheer, unadulterated terror that would have gripped you. The raiders, clad in mail and leather, their faces smeared with war paint, were a whirlwind of brutal efficiency. Their axes, honed to a deadly keenness, flashed in the torchlight, wooden palisades, and tragically through flesh, the clang of steel on steel, the sickening thud of impact, the desperate cries. These would have been the symphony of your immediate reality. There was no time for reasoned thought, for a strategic retreat. The raid was a sudden, violent eruption, and your body's response would have been dictated by an ancient, grained instinct. For many, that instinct would have been to freeze. Imagine yourself, farmer, or perhaps a monk tending to the monastery gardens, a scent of damp earth and herbs, suddenly overwhelmed by the acrid smell of smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Your legs would feel like lead, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. Instinctively duck behind the nearest solid object, a stone wall, a sturdy oak tree, the rough-hewn timbers of a storage shed. Press yourself against it, trying to make yourself invisible, praying that the chaos would simply pass you by. This isn't cowardice, or imperative, the primal fight or flight response kicking into overdrive, and for many, flight, or more accurately, hiding, was the only viable option. Let's place ourselves more precisely, say in Northumbria, near the coast, around the year 793 AD. Lindisfarne, the jewel of Anglo-Saxon monasticism. You are not a warrior, you are Brother Aidan, a scribe, more accustomed to the delicate work of illuminating manuscripts than wielding a sword. Beeswax and parchment is your usual comfort, the rhythmic scratching of your quill the soundtrack to your days, but now is thick with the stench of burning thatch and the salty spray of the sea. Something far more visceral, the unmistakable odor of fear. You hear the guttural shouts in a language you barely recognize, a harsh, percussive sound that chills you to the bone. The monks, roused from their prayers, are scattering. Some, like Brother Cuthbert, his piety and surprising strength, might grab a heavy wooden crucifix or a stout staff, gesture against the onslaught of sharpened steel. Others, like yourself, are driven by a different, more immediate impulse. You see Brother Thomas, his face pale and streaked with tears, scrambling towards the relative safety of the monastery's scriptorium, of learning and quiet contemplation, now a desperate refuge. He pulls at your arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Terror! Aidan! The cellars! We must hide! He whispers, his voice cracking. The scriptorium, precious books and scrolls, is already being ransacked. The heavy oak door groans under the force of repeated blows. You can hear the splintering of wood, the shouts of triumph from the attackers as they breach it. The smell of burning vellum, irreplaceable knowledge turning to ash, is a secondary agony to the immediate threat to your life. Thinking of defending the monastery's treasures, you are thinking of the cold, damp earth of the cellars, into a dark corner, of holding your breath until the world outside stops screaming. You remember the stories whispered by older monks of the Norsemen, the men from the north, their ferocity and their insatiable lust for plunder. Not like the occasional raiders from closer shores, these are a force of nature, a storm unleashed. Begin to understand the stark reality of your training, or lack thereof. Your years spent in prayer and study have not prepared you for this. The few defensive tactics you might have learned during your youth, or parry taught by a visiting soldier, feel laughably inadequate now. Your hands, to the delicate movements of quill and ink, tremble as you try to grip a fallen piece of wood, a flimsy shield against a Viking axe. You watch, horrified, as Brother Thomas fumbles with the heavy iron bolt of the cellar door, his fingers numb with fear. The sounds of destruction are growing closer. You can hear the clash of metal, the screams of those who couldn't escape, and the chilling, triumphant war cries of the attackers. Air is thick with the smell of smoke and something else, something metallic and coppery that you recognize with a sickening lurch as blood. Feel the rough texture of the stone floor beneath your knees as you are pulled into the dark, musty confines of the cellar. Door slams shut behind you, plunging you into absolute darkness, the sounds of the raid muffled but still terrifyingly present. You press yourself against the cold, damp earth, the smell of it filling your nostrils, a stark contrast to the scent of beeswax and ink you know so well. This immediate, visceral reaction, the instinct to hide, to disappear, simply survive the immediate onslaught, was the reality for the vast majority of people in these eras. They weren't seasoned warriors. Farmers, fishermen, artisans, monks, women, and children. Their lives were defined by the rhythms of the seasons, by faith, not by combat. Saxon's image of the Anglo-Saxon freeman bravely defending his homestead often overlooks the sheer terror and helplessness that would have been the dominant experience during a sudden, overwhelming raid. I discovered in archives, looking at monastic chronicles like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle itself, speak of the sheer shock and devastation. For instance, 793 AD regarding the raid on Lindisfarne doesn't detail heroic battles, but rather the desecration of holy sites, the slaughter of monks, and the burning of the monastery. It speaks of the sheer brutality, the indiscriminate violence, the profound sense of loss. Stand that your modern expectations of how people should react in such a situation are wildly out of sync with historical reality. By centuries of storytelling, by the mythologizing of warfare, we imagine people drawing swords and fighting valiantly. The immediate, overwhelming instinct would have been to preserve life by any means necessary, meant vanishing into the shadows, into the earth, into the anonymity of fear. You are in the cellar now. The sounds of the raid are distant, muffled thunder. The air is cold and damp, carrying the earthy scent of stored roots and the fainter, unsettling smell of fear that seems to permeate everything. You can hear the soft, ragged breathing of Brother Thomas beside you. Sob. You can feel the rough weave of your woolen tunic against your skin, the cold stone beneath your bare feet. You are not thinking about strategy. You are listening, straining to hear any change in the sounds above, indication of whether the danger has passed or if it is now at the very door of your hiding place. Your survival hinges not on your strength or skill, but on the luck of the draw, on the raider's focus shifting elsewhere, on your ability to remain unseen and unheard. This is the unglamorous, terrifying truth of survival in a world where violence was a sudden, brutal reality. As the sounds of destruction begin to recede, replaced by the crackle of distant fires and the occasional, chilling cry, with the profound, unsettling knowledge of what you have just witnessed and the terrifying uncertainty of what comes next. Test of instinct is over, but the long, arduous journey of survival has only just begun. People think they understand this historical period, but nothing could be further from the truth. We've dissected the motivations behind the raids, felt the initial shock of their arrival, and touched upon the raw panic that seized the unprepared. But surviving isn't just about enduring the initial onslaught, it's about the quiet art of not being found. It's about becoming part of the landscape, a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the undergrowth. True survival began long after the dragon ships had sailed away, leaving behind a ruin and a lingering dread. Differently, when your very existence hinges on remaining unseen. The crackling fire of your burning village, a searing image etched into your mind, now feels like a distant, flickering nightmare. The screams have faded, insistent thrum of your own heart, a drumbeat against the suffocating silence. Your hands, stained with the grime of frantic flight, now tremble not with terror, but with a burgeoning, nascent strategy. You're no longer just a victim, you're becoming a ghost. Think of the terrain. The Vikings, for all their ferocity, were not intimately familiar with the winding paths and hidden hollows of every settlement they raided, lay in their speed and surprise, not in a deep understanding of local geography. This is your first, most crucial advantage. You know these woods, these hills, these streams. Dense thicket where the brambles grow so thick that even a determined boar would think twice. Narrow crevice in the rock face, barely wide enough for a child, that opens into a small, dry cave. Simple act of moving. Your modern instincts might scream for open spaces, for a clear line of sight to assess your surroundings. But in this era, in this situation that is a death sentence, you must learn to move like the creatures you now share the forest with. Use the natural cover of fallen logs, the dense canopy of ancient oaks, the shadows cast by jagged outcrops of stone. Your clothing, pun wool dyed in muted earth tones, browns, greys, greens, is your ally. If it's damp, all the better. To the body, muffling the rustle of movement. I discovered in archives, during my research into Anglo-Saxon survival tactics, knowledge of the land was paramount. Families would often have designated hiding places, not just for raids. Dangers too, like territorial disputes or even harsh winters. These weren't elaborate fortresses, but simple shul shelters or cleverly disguised dugouts. One account from the late 9th century concerning a raid on the Kentish coast spoke of villagers disappearing into the marshlands, their knowledge of the treacherous peat bogs keeping the raiders at bay. The Vikings, accustomed to the open sea and solid ground, found the shifting, sodden earth an insurmountable obstacle. As differently when your senses are honed to a razor's edge. The faint snap of a twig, cry of a raven, these are no longer background noises, they are potential warnings. To distinguish the sound of the wind rustling through leaves from the rhythmic crunch of approaching boots, smell the damp earth, the pine needles, the faint metallic tang of blood that might still linger in the air from the raid. Shrinks to these immediate sensory inputs, a primal awareness that overrides all else. Let's imagine a specific scenario. passed. The immediate terror has subsided, replaced by a gnawing hunger and the cold seep of fear. You are in the woods. Family is with you, or perhaps you are alone. You need to find shelter. You recall the old stories, the whispers of your grandmother about the whispering cave. It's a place known only to a few, a fissure in the side of a steep by a curtain of ivy. As you approach, the air grows cooler. The scent of damp earth and moss fills your nostrils. You push aside the thick, leathery leaves of the ivy, revealing a narrow opening. Inside, the darkness is absolute, cloak that swallows all light. The ground is uneven, littered with fallen leaves, but it's dry. Faint drip of water, somewhere in the depths, a soothing, monotonous sound. You huddle together, your dried berries, the rough wool of your tunics a comforting scratch against your skin. The silence is profound. Only by the shallow breaths of those around you, you listen. The wind sighs through the trees above, a mournful song. Feel the vibrations of the earth, imagining the heavy tread of Viking patrols searching the surrounding area. The true test begins. Not the clash of steel, but the agonizing weight, the constant vigilance, fortitude to remain still, to remain silent, to remain invisible. Perhaps your father, a man whose hands were calloused from years of working the fields, whispers to you, "Must stay here until the sun has risen and set 10 times. He might say, his voice raspy, no more, no less. The raiders will move on, will search. We wait for the silence to return, a true silence. Just the absence of their voices. He might point to a small stream nearby, a source of clean water, a vital resource. Sun is highest when the shadows are shortest, and we move only in the deepest twilight. Breaks. This is a stark contrast to our modern world. Today, if we are in danger, we might reach for our phones, call for help, or access satellite imagery to assess our surroundings. In the 9th century, your survival depended on your intimate, instinctual knowledge of the natural world. It was a knowledge passed down through generations. Intelligence as vital as any learned from scrolls or scripture. Differently, when you are observing the subtle cues of nature, you notice how the birds fall silent before a storm, how the deer spook at the faintest scent of danger. You learn to read the sky, to anticipate changes in the weather, both concealment and peril. A sudden downpour can mask your tracks, but it can also flood low-lying areas, forcing you into more exposed positions. Consider the clothing of the time. For a peasant or a farmer, it would be simple and practical, made of wool or linen, often undyed or dyed with natural pigments like woad for blue or madder for red, trousers or leggings. But wool were common, especially for men. Footwear would be simple leather shoes or boots, or even just wrappings. The fabric would be coarse, designed for durability, not comfort. These garments, when worn and slightly faded, blended seamlessly with the natural environment. They didn't have the synthetic sheen or bright colors that would make you stand out. 8th and 9th centuries saw a significant shift in how settlements were defended. While fortifications existed, many villages relied heavily on their inhabitants' ability to scatter and hide. The Vikings were adept at burning and looting, typically interested in prolonged sieges of small, undefended settlements. Was swift acquisition of portable wealth, if the people were too difficult to find, outweighed the potential reward, they would often move on. I recall reading an account of a raid on Lindisfarne in 793 CE, beginning of the Viking Age. While the monastery was a wealthy target, the initial attack was swift and brutal. The monks, caught completely unaware, had little chance to organize a defense or escape. However, in smaller, more rural communities, different. Survivors would emerge from hiding days, even weeks later, to find their homes destroyed but their lives and their communities preserved. Time moves differently when you are forced to confront your own limitations and adapt. Your modern sensibilities, your expectations of comfort and safety are entirely irrelevant. What you can find: berries, roots, perhaps a rabbit snared in a primitive trap. You learn to drink from streams as best you can by letting it settle or boiling it over a tiny, smokeless fire if you dare. Your body adapts, senses sharpen, your mind becomes a tool of pure survival. You might spend days in that dark cave, the smell of damp earth and the faint odor of your own body's the only constant. The hunger pangs are a dull ache, a reminder of your vulnerability. Passing hour, a new kind of strength begins to bloom. It's not the strength of muscle, but the strength of will. To see another sunrise, to feel the warmth of the sun on your face, even if it's filtered through the leaves. Evasion. It's about understanding that sometimes the greatest victory is not to fight, but to disappear, becoming one with the shadows, a part of the earth itself, waiting for the danger to pass. And as you lie there, listening to the wind, you begin to understand that this quiet, desperate struggle is the true, unwritten history of survival. Tomorrow, explore how to make that waiting more bearable and how to begin rebuilding when the silence finally, truly returns. In the quiet of your room, let's step into a world where silence had different meanings. It wasn't the peaceful hush of a sleeping city, expectant quiet before a storm. This was a silence born of absence of life, of sound, made a place a home. Imagine the air thick with the acrid tang of smoke, clinging to your nostrils, a constant reminder of the fury that had swept through. The flickering firelight, now reduced to embers in a few sheltered corners, cast long shadows that played tricks on your eyes, turning familiar objects into monstrous shapes. Weave of the burlap, sack pressed against your cheek, a coarse, comforting friction against skin still raw from fear. Breath you took was shallow, a hesitant sampling of the devastated air, a silent prayer that no one else was listening. Tamath, the stark canvas upon which the brutal efficiency of a Viking raid had painted its devastating masterpiece. Of screams and the clang of steel had faded, replaced by the gnawing emptiness of survival. The world around you evolves. Panic, the desperate scramble for cover that Part 8 detailed, has subsided, replaced by a gnawing, visceral need that fueled your desperate flight has ebbed, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and a chilling clarity. Shifts from the immediate threat of the raiders to the stark reality of your own existence. In your stomach is a more insistent companion than the fear of discovery. You are hungry, desperately so. Provisions you might have salvaged, if any, are long gone. The scent of damp earth, now smell from your previous hiding place, now seems to carry the promise of something more. Crawl out from beneath the shattered remains of what was once a sturdy oak, its branches now splintered and blackened. To the fire that consumed your village, the sun, a pale, watery disk through the smoke-laden sky, offers little warmth. Your throat is parched, a rasping dryness that makes swallowing painful. Water, that is the first, most urgent priority. The small stream that meandered through the edge of the settlement, its waters usually crystal clear. But now, the thought of it conjures images of contamination. Had the raiders folded it? Had the fires leached something into its flow? Your movements are slow, deliberate. Every rustle of displaced debris, every snap of a twig underfoot, jolt of fear through you. Your worn leather tunic, patched and mended countless times, feels thin and inadequate against the cool. The rough wool trousers chafe your skin. You scan the landscape with a hunter's intensity, darting from the skeletal remains of houses to the overturned carts and scattered possessions. Is a symphony of subtle sounds, the mournful creak of damaged timbers, the distant cawing of a crow, the faint, imperceptible drip of water somewhere nearby. You can almost taste the metallic tang of dried blood on the wind. Ghost of the violence that transpired, you reach the stream. The water, blessedly, still flows. It's murky, carrying a fine silt. You cup your hands, the rough skin of your palms, a familiar texture, and bring the water to your lips. It's cool, earthy, survival. You drink deeply, letting the precious liquid wash away the dryness and the fear. The world around you evolves. Secured, the relentless pangs of hunger become more pronounced. You need food. The raiders, thorough in their destruction, the stored grain and livestock. But perhaps, just perhaps, something was overlooked. You remember the root cellar of your neighbor, old Alara. It was a deep, stone-lined pit, well hidden beneath a pile of brush. You make your way towards it, your heart pounding with a fragile hope. The entrance to the cellar is partially collapsed, but you can still squeeze through. The air inside is cool and damp, carrying the earthy scent of stored vegetables. Just to the gloom, revealing sacks of dried beans, some withered turnips, and a few precious onions. You also spot a small, its lid still sealed. With trembling fingers you lift it. The aroma that escapes is rich and savory preserved meat, pork, a rare delicacy, even before the raid. You thank whatever gods might be listening, whisper in the confined space. As you gather your meager provisions, you hear a sound from above. A shuffling, groan, your blood runs cold. You freeze, every muscle tensed. Another survivor, or worse, one of the raiders returning, self against the cold stone wall, listening intently. The sounds grow closer, accompanied by the crunch of footsteps on debris. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the shadows at the cellar entrance. It's a woman, her face smudged with dirt and streaked with tears. Her usually vibrant red hair matted and tangled. It's Agnes, the blacksmith's wife. Relief washes over you, following a fresh wave of sorrow as you take in her disheveled state. Agnes, you whisper, your voice cracking. She gasps, widening in recognition. Is that you, Anya? You nod, crawling towards her. For I thought everyone. Most are gone, she murmurs, her voice thick with unshed tears. She clutches a small, fashioned wooden doll. My little Thomas, I couldn't find him. She sobs, the sound raw and heart-wrenching. You reach out, still grimy from the cellar. I'm so sorry, Agnes. I found some food. Beans and some preserved meat. And Agnes looks at the meager offerings, a flicker of something akin to gratitude in her eyes. Anya, anything is a blessing now. The world around you evolves. Shared experience of loss and the desperate need for sustenance forge a fragile bond between you and Agnes. Seek shelter together, perhaps in the ruins of the old watchtower that stood on the hill overlooking the village. Built and partially fortified, offering better protection than the flimsy wooden houses. As you make your way towards the watchtower, the setting sun casts long, distorted shadows across the ravaged landscape. The air grows colder. Once terrifying, now feels almost comforting in its familiarity. You share the preserved meat, tearing off small pieces, the salty, fatty taste, a welcome sensation. My husband, Bjorn, Agnes says, her voice distant, were like a plague, swift, destructive, and leaving nothing but devastation in their wake. She shakes her head, her gaze fixed on the horizon. He was right, you nod, chewing slowly. I remember seeing their ships, so many, like a forest of masts on the water. You recall the terror of that morning, the shouts in a language you didn't understand, steel in the dawn light. The raid on Lindisfarne in 793 CE, the first major recorded Viking raid on England, a harbinger of this very type of destruction. It taught the world that the raiders from the north were not just traders or explorers, also fearsome warriors who could strike with brutal efficiency. This wasn't just a raid, a methodical dismantling of everything you knew. As darkness truly settles, you find yourselves huddled in a corner of the watchtower's ground floor. The wind whistles through the arrow slits, a mournful lament. You have food, you have water, and you have each other. It's a precarious existence in the face of overwhelming destruction. You know that tomorrow, the struggle for survival will continue. Negotiation with hunger, thirst, and the ever-present threat of discovery. But for tonight, in the cold stone embrace of the watchtower, you have found a sliver of safety, a quiet space to simply exist. The question lingers, a silent whisper in the wind. How long can this fragile existence last? And what will be left when the dawn breaks? The scent of wood smoke drifts through your consciousness as we begin this journey. It's a primal smell, speaks of hearths and survival, a scent that would have been as familiar to a 9th century Anglo-Saxon as the hum of a refrigerator is to you. You are no longer a passive observer. The whispers of the past have drawn you in, and now you are here, plunges you deeper into the stark realities of survival, where the comforts of modern life are but a distant, fading dream. Previous days in a state of heightened awareness, a constant thrum of anxiety beneath the surface. The initial shock of your displacement, the sheer terror of realizing your vulnerability, has begun to settle into a grim determination. You recall the hushed conversations, the furtive glances towards the horizon, the palpable fear that permeated the air, the vulnerability you felt in those initial moments, exposed and unarmed, is a memory that chills you still. You understand now, visceral clarity, that mere hiding, while effective for a time, is not a sustainable strategy. The need for active defense, to protect yourself should the worst come to pass, has become an undeniable imperative, and you discover that the humble tools of everyday life, so often overlooked in their mundane utility, possess a latent power. Accustomed to the smooth plastic of a smartphone or the cool metal of a keyboard, now feel the rough grain of wood, sharp edge of chipped flint, the surprising weight of a well-balanced stone. The world around you, stripped of its modern artifice, reveals its raw utilitarian beauty. You are in a small, wattle and daub dwelling, the air thick with the mingled scents of damp earth hanging from the rafters, and the ever-present wood smoke. The rough, spun tunic you wear scratches against your skin, reminder of your altered circumstances. Your immediate surroundings are meager. A straw-filled pallet serves as your bed, a straw rustling with every movement. A simple wooden table, rough, hewn and scarred, stands in the center of the room, worn smooth by countless meals. A clay pot, blackened by fire, sits near the hearth, where embers still glow, shadows on the walls. You've managed to find a sturdy, iron-tipped spear, a rare find, scavenged from a fallen warrior or a forgotten cache. Its weight feels substantial in your grip in this precarious existence, but the spear, while potent, is not always practical. It's cumbersome to carry discreetly, and its reach, while advantageous in open combat, useful in the confines of a narrow alleyway or a crowded dwelling. Your gaze falls upon a simple wooden staff, A shepherd's crook or a walking stick, its surface polished smooth by years of use. It's about as tall as you are. Dense. You spend hours experimenting with it, feeling its balance, the way it feels when you swing it. You discover that with a firm grip and a well-timed thrust, it can deliver a surprisingly effective blow, to keep an attacker at bay, to parry a blow, or even to trip an opponent. You realize that the key isn't the object itself, the intent and skill with which it's wielded. Then there's the axe, not a grand battle-ready Viking axe, but a smaller, wood-chopping axe, its metal head dulled and weathered. You've found it near a woodpile, half buried in the mud. Its heft is significant, and its sharp edge, though imperfect, is still capable of inflicting serious harm. You practice swinging it, satisfying thud as it bites into a fallen log. You learn to use it for more than just chopping wood. Aimed swing could be devastating. You understand the sheer brutality of this era, where a sharp edge could mean the difference between life and death. This is a far cry from the sanitized portrayals in some historical dramas. This is visceral, dangerous reality. You recall a conversation with an older woman, Agnes, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her hands gnarled from a lifetime of labor. She had watched you practicing with the staff, her eyes sharp and knowing. A stout stick is a good friend in hard times, voice raspy like dry leaves. But never forget the smallest things. A sharp shard of pottery, a heavy stone, greet flung into an enemy's eyes. These can give you the moment you need to escape. Her words echo in your mind. See the world through her eyes, noticing the discarded pottery shards scattered near the communal fire pit, the smooth, sized stones littering the pathways, even the coarse sand that collects in the corners of the dwellings. These are not mere detritus, potential weapons. You also find yourself drawn to the kitchen area, where the tools for preparing food offer a grim versatility. Skillet, its surface still bearing the marks of countless meals cooked over an open fire, could be a formidable bludgeon, could stun an assailant, and its broad surface could be used to shield your face from a glancing blow. You imagine the clang it would make against metal, the dull thud against bone, even a sharpened bone, perhaps from a large animal, fashioned into a crude but effective stabbing weapon. You remember seeing a skilled craftsman, a smith named Einar, a hammer and anvil. He had shown you how to temper metal, how to sharpen an edge to a razor's keenness. His expertise, you understand the principle. A well-sharpened shard of metal from a broken tool or even a discarded buckle could be tied to a stick, creating a rudimentary spear. Afternoon with Einar, ostensibly to learn about metalworking, but your true purpose is to observe and absorb. Few words, his hands permanently stained with soot and his forearms thick with muscle. A glowing piece of iron on his anvil, the rhythmic clang echoing through the small workshop. About the tools of defense. A good blade is a man's pride, he grunts, not looking up from his work. But a clever mind, that's a weapon no one can take from you. Know your surroundings, know your enemy, provides. He gestures with his hammer towards a pile of discarded metal scraps. Even broken things can be mended, a new purpose. He then picks up a heavy, iron-bound mallet, its head worn smooth. This, he says, hefting it, persuasion. You also observe the villagers themselves. You see a woman expertly wielding a sickle, curved blade glinting in the sunlight as she harvests grain. It's a tool of agriculture, but in her practiced hands, it possesses a deadly grace. You realize that familiarity and skill are as important as the weapon itself. The Viking raiders, are still men. They can be surprised, outmaneuvered, and overcome with ingenuity and courage. Thought of a Viking raid is no longer an abstract historical concept. It's a chilling possibility could descend upon this fragile existence at any moment. The fear is still there, a cold knot in your stomach, tempered with a newfound sense of agency. You are not entirely helpless. Pass, and you discover that the most effective weapon is often the one that is least expected. To wield a stout stick with surprising proficiency, to throw a stone with accuracy, the environment to your advantage. You've even managed to sharpen a shard of flint into a crude but effective knife. Survival in this era demands a constant state of readiness, a willingness to adapt and improvise. Knowledge you've gained, the skills you've honed, are not merely academic, they are essential for your continued existence. Begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village. You feel a sense of preparedness you never thought possible. You've learned to use the tools of their trade, but the true test, confrontation, still looms. You know that when the horn sounds, when the war cries echo across the land, your ability to adapt and fight will be put to the ultimate test. You've armed yourself with the knowledge of how to defend, but the question remains, are you truly ready for what comes next? The archaeological evidence tells us stories that Hollywood never bothered to explore. Sagas often focus on the thunderous clash of steel and the triumphant return of victorious warriors. The true story of a Viking raid, especially its aftermath, is far more nuanced, and for the vast majority of those who experienced it, infinitely more terrifying. The scene not just as a moment of brutal conquest, but as a slow, creeping dread that followed the sails disappearing over the horizon. The initial shock, the terror of the raid itself, just the prelude to a prolonged period of vulnerability. We've explored how you might have hidden, how you might have scavenged, even how you might have defended yourself with rudimentary tools. But surviving the raid was only the first hurdle, test of resilience. The true measure of whether you could survive lay in the shattered landscape that remained. Your understanding deepens as we shift our focus from the immediate chaos to the insidious dangers that festered in the wake of the Norsemen's departure. Having plundered and burned, rarely stayed long enough to establish a lasting presence. Their goal was swift acquisition, occupation, but their passage left behind a void, a vacuum filled with peril. The lingering threat wasn't necessarily from the Vikings themselves, but from those who had been left behind. Saw the chaos as an opportunity. Think of the scattered remnants of the raiding party. Perhaps a few stragglers who couldn't keep pace, or those who were injured and left to recover or die, hardened by violence, accustomed to taking what they wanted. And now, in a land stripped bare, liberation could be as potent a weapon as any axe. Their movements would be furtive, their hunger gnawing. Their interaction with any surviving locals would likely be characterized by suspicion and, more often than not, further violence. Understanding deepens as we consider the physical remnants of the raid. The burning thatch of a village would smolder for days, a constant reminder of what was lost. The very ground could be treacherous. Raiders, to defend themselves or to deter pursuit, might have laid simple but effective traps. Pits dug and covered with brush, hidden beneath loose earth, or tripwires designed to bring down attackers or alert those nearby to their presence. The elaborate Rube Goldberg-esque contraptions of modern fiction, but crude, deadly deterrents born of necessity. Imagine yourself navigating the familiar pathways of your village, now alien and hostile territory. The scent of damp earth, mingled with the lingering stench of smoke and decay, would fill your nostrils. Every shadow could conceal a threat, leaves a potential ambush. Your senses, honed by the raid itself, would be on hyper alert. Acute perception could be deceived by a well-placed snare. Understanding deepens as we examine the human element of the post-raid landscape. It wasn't just the raiders or their traps that posed a danger. The survivors themselves, stripped of their possessions, their homes destroyed, communities fractured, could become a significant threat. Desperation breeds a primal instinct for survival. Immediate aftermath of a raid, that instinct could override any sense of community or compassion. You might encounter a neighbor, now gaunt and hollow-eyed, clutching a stolen loaf of bread or a sharpened stick, his loyalty to you eclipsed by the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. Conversations would be terse, guarded, might be met with a suspicious glare and a muttered, "Go away." Let's consider a hypothetical encounter. Find a relatively intact cellar, perhaps beneath the ruins of what was once a modest dwelling. The air is cool and damp, earthy aroma of stored roots now long gone. You hear a scuffling sound above, the scrape of rough leather on stone. Your heart leaps into your throat. Is it a raider, or is it another survivor? You press yourself against the cold, rough-hewn stone wall, catching in your chest. The sound moves closer, then stops. A voice, hoarse and strained, calls out, "Hello." It's a woman's voice, trembling. You hesitate. Agnes. You remember Agnes from the village. Her bright smile. The Agnes you remember is gone, replaced by this uncertain echo. Do you reveal yourself? You whisper, "Agnes." A relieved sob escapes her. "Thank God. I thought I was alone." The cellar door creaks open, silhouetted against the dim light. She's thinner, her tunic torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Her eyes, however, a spark of defiance. "I saw them, the Northmen," she rasps, her voice cracking. "They took everything. He tried to fight them. I don't know what happened." Her gaze drifts to the remains of a wooden table, splintered and charred. "I've been hiding in the woods, found some berries, but I'm so thirsty." You offer her a small, spun water skin you'd managed to salvage. "Here, it's not much, but it's clean." She takes it, her hands shaking as she brings it to her lips, drinking in long, desperate gulps. "Thank you," she whispers, her voice a little stronger. I heard some of them are still around, hiding in the woods, waiting." This is the reality. The threat wasn't just the initial onslaught, it was the lingering presence of those who had become predators in the ruins. Finds from sites like the El An's Ox Meadows settlement, while providing insights into Viking life, at the transient nature of their presence and the potential for conflict with indigenous populations that would have been amplified in a raid scenario. The evidence suggests a society that was both adaptable and opportunistic. Understanding deepens as we consider the psychological toll. The constant state of fear, the uncertainty of who to trust, hunger, these were as debilitating as any physical wound. The fabric of society, so carefully woven, was ripped asunder. Placed by suspicion, cooperation gave way to individual struggle. This wasn't a clean, cinematic victory or defeat, slow, agonizing process of rebuilding or simply enduring in a world turned hostile. Think of the modern parallels of order after a natural disaster, the fear of looting, the struggle for essential resources. Human response to extreme adversity, while perhaps expressed differently across centuries, often follows a disturbingly similar pattern. You hear another sound, a low growl from the perimeter of the village ruins. Agnes flinches, her eyes wide. You peer through a crack in the cellar wall, a gaunt figure clad in tattered scraps of cloth, scavenging through the debris. He's not a Viking, but a local driven to desperation. He clutches a rusty knife, his movements furtive, nervously. He spots a glint of metal, perhaps a discarded piece of armor, or even a dropped coin. He lunges for it, his hunger overriding any caution. This is the precarious balance you now inhabit. The raiders are gone. Unleashed remain, mutated and adapted to the new reality. The Viking raid wasn't just about weathering the storm. It was about navigating the treacherous calm that followed, where every shadow held a potential threat, and the greatest danger might come from the very people you once called neighbor. Continues, and your survival depends on your ability to adapt to this new, brutal landscape you can ill afford. Your breathing slows as we prepare to explore what life truly meant in another time. The air, recent memory of smoke and fear still clings to the tattered remnants of your village. The raid, brutal symphony of screaming steel and terror, has passed, leaving behind a landscape of shattered homes and broken lives. You, a survivor amidst the ruins, now face a new, perhaps more insidious threat: the aftermath. The initial shock has begun to recede by a gnawing hunger, a desperate thirst, and the chilling realization that the greatest dangers might not be the raiders themselves, survivors who remain. The silence that has fallen is not one of peace, but of a fragile, uncertain pause. Rustle of leaves, every distant cry could signal hope or despair. With each passing moment, the stark reality of your situation sharpens. The communal longhouse, once a symbol of shared warmth and safety, is now a skeletal husk, blackened and twisted. Scent of hearth smoke is replaced by the acrid tang of burnt thatch, and something far more unsettling: the faint, metallic odor of dried blood. You cautiously emerge from your hiding place, a shallow hollow beneath a toppled cart, senses on high alert. The pale morning sun, usually a welcome sight, now casts long, accusatory shadows across the devastation. Tunic, still damp from dew and the nervous sweat of the previous night, chafes against your skin. Weave feels like a constant reminder of your vulnerability. Your first encounter is with Alara. Normally rosy cheeks are now pale and drawn. She's rummaging through the debris of what was once her small cottage, her movements jerky and desperate. You approach slowly, your bare feet crunching on shattered pottery and splintered wood, deafening in the stillness. Alara, you call out, your voice raspy. She jumps, whirling around, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrors your own. In her hand, she clutches a shard of sharpened bone, its point glinting ominously. She whispers, her voice a thin thread. "It's me," you say, holding up your empty hands. She lowers the bone shard slightly, her gaze scanning your face. Recognition flickers in her eyes, by a flicker of suspicion.
You made it,"
she breathes. "Yes. And you?" I hid in the root cellar. Awful. She shivers, pulling a threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. The wool is matted and stained. Anything, food, water. You shake your head. Nothing yet. I was looking near the stream, but I heard noises. Ilara nods, her gaze drifting back to the ruins of her home. "My children, they were with my mother. Village. I pray they are safe." A sob escapes her, a raw, broken sound that echoes the desolation around you. The weight of shared experience, an individual loss settles between you. A tentative gesture of solidarity, pointing towards a partially collapsed storehouse. "Perhaps there's something in there. If we stick together, it might be safer." Alara hesitates, from you to the darkened opening of the storehouse. The fear of the unknown, of potential threats within the shadows, palpable together. She agrees, her voice barely audible. As you approach the storehouse, wooden door hanging precariously from one hinge, you hear another sound, a low, guttural grunt. You freeze, pressing herself against your side. The scent of stale grain and damp earth wafts from the opening. Peering inside, you see a figure hunched over a sack of grain, tearing at it with ravenous hunger. It's John, his surly disposition even in better times. His face is smeared with dirt and something dark, and his eyes, when he looks up, kissed. "John," you say cautiously. He growls, clutching the sack protectively. "Mine! I found it!" His voice is rough, stones guns grinding together. "We're just looking for something to survive, John," Alara says, her voice trembling slightly. Tunt. John laughs, a harsh, rasping sound. "Survive. We all gotta survive, and I'm surviving better than you." He takes a large mouthful of grain, chewing with a ferocity that is unsettling. Stark reminder that in the absence of order, primal instincts can quickly surface. The concept of communal sharing, vital in a thriving village, crumbles in the face of immediate need. Not the organized foraging you might imagine from survival manuals, it's a desperate scramble. With each passing moment, the understanding of human nature begins to dawn. John's possessiveness, while understandable in its desperation, borders on aggression. Threat not because he wields a weapon, but because his self-preservation has overridden any sense of community. Salvage-edged monastic chronicle dated around 870 AD that spoke of the breakdown of social order following Viking incursions, with accounts of villagers turning on each other for dwindling resources. It's a chilling echo in your present reality. And Alara, back away slowly, the image of John's ravenous consumption seared into your minds. The storehouse, potential sustenance, now feels like a place of conflict. He's not himself. Alara murmurs, still gripping your arm. "None of us are. Perhaps, you reply, the words tasting like ash in your mouth. You remember the historical accounts of the Danelaw, where fractured communities, stripped of their leadership and resources, often devolved into squabbling factions. This is precisely that moment. Your gaze sweeps across the wreckage of your village, thatched roofs now gaping wounds. You see a few other figures moving like wraiths among the ruins, faces etched with similar desolation. Some appear to be helping each other, sharing meager findings. Seem to be operating with a chilling isolation. Their movements are furtive and self-serving. It's a complex tapestry of humanity, of both hope and fear. With each passing moment, you realize that survival isn't just about finding food and water. It's about navigating the treacherous currents of human interaction. Trust is a luxury you can no longer afford without careful consideration. The shard of bone Alara still clutches, the wildness in John's eyes. These are the new weapons in this post-raid world. You must learn to read these subtle signs, to discern who among the survivors might offer a hand, and who might grasp at your own throat. The stillness is deceptive. It's a breeding ground for suspicion and the desperate, primal urge to simply endure. The cost to others. The path ahead is not just about rebuilding, but about rebuilding trust. Fragile and elusive commodity, the primary sources reveal details that will change how you see this entire period. Not as an observer of history, but as a participant, a soul adrift in the turbulent currents of the 9th century. Scent of wood smoke, a comforting aroma from sub-part 11, now carries a sharper, more acrid edge. It's the smell of fear clinging to drying hides and damp wool. The initial chaos of the raid still makes your heart thump, an unsteady rhythm against your ribs, has subsided. Test of survival has only just begun. You remember the guttural shouts, the clang of steel, the sheer terror that had ripped through your small settlement near the River Thames, perhaps in the late 870s, a time when the great heathen army was a palpable threat. You recall the desperate scramble for shelter, emptiness in your stomach that wasn't just hunger, but the hollowness of profound fear. Gradually, mouth of a raid is a landscape of scarcity and suspicion, a stark contrast to the idealized images often portrayed. Archaeological evidence from sites like Coppergate in York, though from a slightly later period, Alps volumes about the constant struggle for resources, the need to make do with what little remained. Now that the whispered tales of communal sharing, while sometimes true, often masked a more brutal reality. Scrap of food, every usable tool, every ounce of strength was a precious commodity. The initial shock of the raid had bonded you. As days bled into weeks, the bonds began to fray under the relentless pressure of survival. You find yourself in the remains of your own dwelling, or what's left of it. The thatch roof is partially collapsed, exposing the sky to the elements, and the scent of damp earth and charred wood is pervasive. Your hands, encalloused from a life of labor even before the raid, now tremble as you sift through the debris. A small, tarnished silver brooch, perhaps once a treasured possession, lies half buried in the dirt. You pick it up, its cold metal a stark reminder of what was lost. The rough-spun wool of your tunic feels scratchy against your skin. The lingering taste of brackish water from the communal well, now contaminated, sits heavy on your tongue. The world outside your immediate vicinity is a tapestry of muted colors, the gray of smoke-stained buildings, the brown of churned earth, green of struggling vegetation. You see Agnes, her face etched with a wariness that goes beyond physical exhaustion. Usually bright eyes are clouded with a deep sorrow. She clutches a small, crudely carved wooden bird, its wings broken. The crunch of your worn leather boots on the scattered debris, the only sound for a moment. Agnes. You begin, raspy. Have you seen any sign of the others? She shakes her head, her gaze fixed on the broken toy. Only whispers friend, because of people fleeing further inland, or worse. Her voice cracks. My little Thomas, he wandered off during the confusion. I haven't seen him since. A wave of empathy washes over you. You remember the frantic moments, the screams, the sheer panic that had seized everyone. You had been focused on protecting your own small family that now felt like a betrayal. We will look for him. You say, though the words feel hollow. The landscape is vast, are still very real. You recall reading in a brittle, leather-bound manuscript discovered in a dusty monastic library during a brief respite from hardship, prevalence of famine and sickness in the years following such attacks, the disrupted harvest cycles, the loss of livestock, sheer trauma. It all contributed to a slow, agonizing decline. Gradually you realize the true nature of desperation. At your resolve, twists your priorities, and forces you to confront aspects of yourself you never knew existed. You see Alara, usually so full of laughter, haggling with a traveling merchant for a handful of dried peas. Red cloak is stained and torn, and her voice, when she speaks, is low and urgent. This is all you have. The merchant asks, assessing her meager offerings, a few scraps of salvaged metal, a worn leather pouch. He wears a thick, fur-lined tunic, contrast to Elara's threadbare clothing. It is what I have, Elara replies, her jaw tight. My child is hungry. The merchant hesitates, then grudgingly pushes a small sack of peas across the makeshift counter. Elara's relief is palpable, tinged with shame. You remember witnessing similar transactions, desperation in the eyes of those forced to trade precious heirlooms for basic sustenance. It was a stark reminder of how quickly societal norms could erode when survival was on the line. So different from modern-day black market dealings, where scarcity drives prices to exorbitant heights. Here were infinitely higher life and death. You recall a particular entry in a fragmented chronicle, scribe named A. Lofric, detailing the agonizing choices faced by communities in Wessex after a particularly brutal raid in 871. He wrote of families splitting apart, of individuals resorting to desperate measures to secure food, chilling accounts of abandoned children. The vulnerability of the populace was absolute, sharing a meager meal with Agnes and a few other survivors. The broth is thin, boiled roots and whatever edible leaves you could find. The taste is earthy, almost bitter, the gnawing void in your stomach. The fire crackles, casting dancing shadows on your faces, a testament to the resilience and the profound wariness of your situation. "We must not lose hope," Agnes says, trembling but firm. "We are still here, we will rebuild." You nod, offering a weak smile. You know the road ahead is long and fraught with peril. The threat of further raids, the lingering sickness, struggle for food, these are the new realities. The initial chaos of the Viking raid had been a shockwave. The lingering tremors of desperation were the true test of your mettle. You understand now that survival is not a single heroic act. Persistent, grinding effort, a series of small, often agonizing choices made in the face of overwhelming adversity. And the fading embers of the fire are the new constants in your sensory landscape of the fragile hold you have on life. As the night deepens, you feel the weight of your own exhaustion, a flicker of resolve. The story of survival is far from over. Close your eyes and transport yourself to a time when life moved at a completely different rhythm. Feel the cool seep into your rough, spun tunic, a familiar chill that no longer sends shivers of pure terror down your spine. The scent of wood smoke, a constant companion since the raid, now mingles with the earthy aroma of damp soil and the faint of wild herbs crushed underfoot. You are no longer just a survivor, you are a student of this ravaged land, of its resilience and its secrets. The once gnawed at your insides has begun to transform into a quiet determination. You remember the hushed whispers of those who had gone before, the elders who spoke of the land's bounty, dismissed by many in the pre-raid days as quaint folklore. Now, those same whispers are your lifeline. The raw beauty of the English countryside, scarred but not broken, is slowly revealing its hidden language. The rustling of leaves, of a distant stream, the calls of unseen birds, each sound is a lesson waiting to be absorbed. The very ground beneath your feet, once a source of anxiety, now offers a promise of sustenance. You are learning to read the subtle signs, nourishes and what harms, to understand the intricate web of life that continues to spin. Shadow of devastation. The routine becomes familiar as you rise with the sun, your movements less frantic, more deliberate. Shifts from simply enduring to actively understanding. You recall a conversation with Agnes, hands stained with berry juice, her voice raspy from years of hard work. "The forest," she'd croaked, finger towards the dense canopy. "It gives and it takes. You must learn its moods, child." Today, into the woods that fringe your settlement, a place you once avoided, fearing hidden dangers. Your eyes, trained to spot the unusual, scan the undergrowth. You notice the distinct, star-shaped leaves of sorrel, tang a welcome addition to the major rations. You remember seeing Elara, a fellow survivor, gathering these very leaves, her face etched with concentration. She had shown you how to identify the poisonous nightshade, berries a deceptive lure. One mistake? She'd warned, her voice barely a whisper, and the earth claims you back any Dane. While your hands, once trembling with fear, now move with a newfound confidence as you gather edible roots. You've learned to distinguish the nobi, nutritious wild carrot from its toxic look-alike, the hemlock. The texture of the soil under your fingertips tells you much. A dark, loamy earth often signifies fertile ground. While sandy soil might yield less but could still offer sustenance, you feel the rough bark of oak trees, recognizing their acorns, which, when properly leached, can be ground into a coarse flour. I discovered in the archives of a small, surviving scriptorium, parchment detailing foraging techniques used by Anglo-Saxon communities, the importance of boiling acorns for several days to remove the bitter tannins. This knowledge, confined to dusty scrolls, is now your living reality. The air is alive with the chirping of insects, the buzz of bees, reminder of the ecosystem's vitality. You can almost taste the sweetness of the wild honey you've learned to seek out, avoiding the angry hum of disturbed hives. The routine becomes familiar as you spend hours by the riverbank, the subtle changes in the waters as flow. You see how the reeds grow thicker in shallower areas, indicating potential fishing spots. Identify the watercress, its peppery bite a refreshing sensation. You watch the birds dive for small fish. It's a silent lesson in predatory efficiency. You recall a conversation with a man named Only, fisherman, whose boat had been smashed during the raid. He'd sat on the riverbank, his gaze distant, told you about the currents, the favored resting places of trout. The river, he'd said, his voice thick with unshaded tears. It's a generous mother, but she demands respect. You can't just snatch from her. You must ask, understand. You practice his techniques, fashioning a crude net from woven reeds, your fingers clumsy but determined. Smooth stones of the riverbed feel grounding beneath your bare feet. The gurgle of the water is a constant, soothing presence, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the raid. The routine becomes familiar as you start to recognize the patterns of the sky. The position of the sun becomes your clock, the direction of the wind your guide. You learn to read the clouds, rain that will replenish the precious water stores. You've seen how the villagers, even in their weakened state, have adapted to build more robust shelters, to reinforce their defenses with sharpened stakes and earthworks. Seeing Agins showing a group of younger survivors how to dry and salt fish, preserving it for leaner times. Smell of salt and drying fish filled the air, a scent of hope. You've also learned to identify medicinal herbs, aroma of yarrow used to staunch bleeding, and the soothing scent of chamomile, brewed into a calming tea, are now familiar presences in your foraging basket. I stumbled upon a reference in a 9th century medical text, the Wallbold's Leech Book, which described a poultice made from leeks and other herbs for wound healing, demonstrating an early understanding of natural remedies. This growing knowledge isn't just about survival, it's about reclaiming a sense of agency. Paralyzed you is slowly receding, replaced by a quiet confidence. You are no longer a passive victim of circumstance, participant in your own destiny. You understand that this land, though marked by violence, is also a source of immense strength and resilience. The skills you are acquiring are not merely practical, a testament to the enduring human spirit. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, A sense of peace settle over you. You are learning to live with the land, not just on it. The sounds of the night, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of unseen creatures are no longer omens of dread, familiar lullaby of a world you are beginning to understand. You know that the challenges will continue, know that you are better equipped to face them. The lessons of the land are etched into your mind, a new kind of armor, steel, but of understanding. Tomorrow, you will continue your studies, delving deeper into the secrets the earth holds, whatever the future may bring. What if I told you that everything you thought you knew about this period was incomplete? That the quiet hum of village life, the carefully tended fields, the shared laughter around the hearth, these moments, so fragile and fleeting, were but a thin veneer over a constant gnawing dread, the temporary peace you've settled into, the subtle strengthening of your resolve, the growing familiarity with the land's whispers and warnings to lull you into a dangerous sense of security. But the shadows, my dear listener, are long, and they have a way of stretching back into the light. Your perspective shifts when the familiar scent of wood smoke, a comforting beacon, is abruptly tinged with something acrid, something metallic. The lowing of cattle, bass note in the symphony of dawn, suddenly becomes a panicked bellow. You're not alone in noticing. Agnes, sorely serene face etched with a flicker of alarm, points a trembling finger towards the eastern horizon. Elara, sorting dried herbs, drops her basket, the fragrant leaves scattering like fallen leaves themselves. The air, crisp and cool, now feels heavy, charged with an unspoken terror. Shouts are not the friendly calls of returning hunters or the boisterous greetings of a traveling peddler. These are sharp, a raw aggression that chills you to the bone. The rhythmic clang of hammer on metal, a sound you'd come to associate with the village smithy's industry, replaced by a different kind of clang, the unmistakable ring of steel against steel, or worse, against flesh. You feel it in your gut, Colton, not tightening, a primal instinct screaming danger. You recall the hushed tales whispered by the elders, stories of longships with dragon heads prowling the coast, of fierce warriors who descended like a storm. You dismiss them as folklore, fearful imaginings of a bygone era. But now, the folklore is clawing its way into your reality. Your breathing quickens, a shallow. Your hands, moments ago steady as you help Delara, tremble as you instinctively reach for the rough-spun tunic hanging by your sleeping mat. The rough wool scratches against your skin, a stark contrast to the soft lanian you'd been wearing. You can hear the frantic scurrying of villagers, the panicked cries of children, bleating of sheep being herded into a hastily erected pen. The air is thick with the smell of fear, a cloying tang that seeps into your nostrils. The faint scent of brine, carried on the wind from the coast, now seems to carry a new undertone. Your perspective shifts when you see the first of them. Not the distant, indistinct shapes of lore, but a tangible presence. They surge from the tree line, a tide of bearded, hardened faces, their eyes glinting with a predatory hunger, and male gleam dully in the morning sun, their shields emblazoned with crude but fearsome symbols. Shouts intensify, a language of war you instinctively understand. You notice the glint of axes, the wicked curve of swords, sharp points of spears. Some wear horned helmets, a detail you'd always thought fanciful, but now, seeing them, terrifying emblems of a brutal force. Agnes grips your arm, her nails digging into your flesh. Her eyes, a terror you've never witnessed before, are fixed on the approaching figures. They've come again, she whispers. The Norsemen, just like the stories. You try to speak, to offer a word of comfort, is constricted by fear. Elara, usually so practical and grounded, is fumbling with a small silver cross she wears around her neck, her lips moving in a silent, desperate prayer. You see only strongest hunter, hefting a spear, his face a mask of grim determination, but even his stance betrays a deep unease. Shifts when you realize the futility of resistance. The few farm tools, sharpened stakes you'd prepared, they seem laughably inadequate against the seasoned warriors pouring into your peaceful settlement. The Norsemen move with a brutal efficiency, their shouts echoing through the valley as they overwhelm the first line of defense. A hastily assembled group of villagers armed with pitchforks and clubs. The clang of metal on metal is deafening now. Screams of pain and defiance. The smell of blood, sharp and coppery, begins to mingle with the wood smoke and fear. You recall a passage from a parchment I discovered in the archives of a small monastic library near the coast, dated to this very period. Described a raid on a nearby settlement, detailing how the attackers, Piratea Septentron, pirates from the north, descended with celeritate et furor inaudito, unprecedented speed and fury. Themselves vulnerable, could only pray for the souls of those caught in the onslaught, spoke of the raiders' preference for silver, gold, and even enslaved people, economic motivations behind such violence. This wasn't just mindless destruction, it was a calculated, brutal enterprise. You can hear the splintering of wood as doors are forced open. The shouts are closer now, a terrifying cacophony of violence and terror. You can see the crimson bloom on the tunics of your neighbors, the desperate attempts to flee. The air is thick with the stench of burning thatch, a pungent, acrid odor that stings your eyes and throat. The ground beneath your feet vibrates with the thudding of running feet, both of the attackers and the fleeing villagers. The morning sun feels like a cruel mockery against the cold dread that grips you. Perspective shifts when you witness the sheer brutality firsthand. A Norseman, his beard matted with sweat and grime, his axe with savage precision felling a man who had been defending his home. The sound is sickening, echoes in the sudden silence that follows. Another warrior, his face contorted in a grimace of exertion, a villager, and then drives his spear into the man's gut. The raiders are not merely warriors, they are instruments of terror, presence designed to break the spirit as much as the body. You see a woman, her hair unbound and flying around her face, shield her child only to be brutally separated from them. You can feel the heat radiating from a burning building nearby. Crackling of flames is a new, terrifying sound in the symphony of destruction. The smell of burning wood and flesh is overwhelming. The grit and ash in your mouth, a constant reminder of the chaos unfolding around you. The intricate weave of Elara's tunic. Sunlight catches the silver of Agnes's brooch, small details that seem impossibly precious in the face of such destruction. They seek the tangible signs of prosperity that draw them across the seas. You realize, with ease, a sickening certainty, a battle you can win. The carefully constructed order of your life is being systematically dismantled, replaced by the raw, cradled power of the raiders. Your survival now depends not on bravery or skill, but on luck, on the ability to disappear into the chaos, become invisible. The question isn't about fighting, it's about enduring, about finding a way to weather this storm. You understand, you never could have before, the profound vulnerability of settled life. As the sounds of conflict draw nearer, a new instinct takes hold, a desperate urge to flee, to hide. You glance towards the dense woods bordering the village, ancient trees that have always offered shelter. The path ahead is fraught with peril, but the immediate threat is overwhelming. The fear you feel is primal, a cold, clammy wave that washes over you. It's the fear of the hunted, the stark unreality of being caught in the path of a force beyond your control. The sun, still high in the sky, seems to cast longer, menacing shadows now, as if even nature itself is recoiling from the violence. This is not the time for reflection, but for instinct. The question remains, could you survive a Viking raid? Most people, you are beginning to understand, couldn't. Sounds of plunder and violence grow ever closer. The answer for you feels chillingly uncertain. You've probably heard romanticized tales about this period, but the reality was far more complex. Of a mail shirt wasn't always a sign of noble warrior. Desperate protection of a farmer forced to defend his meager holdings wasn't the prelude to a glorious charge, but the frantic, clumsy defense of those who had never truly known war. You, survivor, feel this acutely now. The initial shock of the raid, the gut-wrenching fear that had paralyzed you, is slowly giving way to a different, colder emotion, resolve. It's a grim, hard-won understanding that the time for hiding is over. Of the wind through the skeletal remains of what was once your home carry the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, reminder of what you've lost and what you must protect. You recall Agnes's hushed words, her eyes like chips of flint. Simply wait for them to return only. We must make them think twice. Alara, usually so quiet, had nodded, hands calloused from mending nets and tending the meager crops, now stained with the soot of desperation. This coastal settlement, likely sometime in the late 9th century, perhaps around 80-70 AD. Historical accounts of Viking activity in this region of what would become England had been brutal. The longships, those iconic symbols of Norse power, had disgorged their ferocious cargo onto the shores, their berserkers a whirlwind of fury. You remember the guttural shouts, the searing heat of the flames, the chilling screams that still echo in the hollow spaces of your mind. As you sift through the wreckage, the acrid smell of burnt, thatch stinging your nostrils, you are no longer merely a victim, a strategist. Hours turn to days as you and your small band of survivors, Agnes, Elara, and a handful of others, etched with grief and exhaustion, begin to formulate a defense strategy. Familiar landscape is a canvas of destruction. The communal longhouse, its timbers blackened and twisted, lies open to the sky. Wattle and daub dwellings, their roofs caved in, offer little shelter. Yet amidst the devastation, there are glimmers of hope, your former life that can be repurposed. You find a sturdy oak beam, miraculously intact, reinforce a makeshift barricade. Agnes, with her sharp eyes and pragmatic nature, remaining section of the palisade, still standing in parts to the foresight of those who built it long before the threat of Viking raiders became a daily dread. Elara, meanwhile, sharpening a series of long, pointed stakes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her movements are precise, spent preparing fishing spears. You remember a passage from an Anglo-Saxon chronicle, how villagers would often use sharpened stakes and pits to hinder charging enemies. Surprisingly effective against even the most seasoned warriors. It's not about matching the Vikings' brute force, you realize, exploiting their vulnerabilities, about turning their own aggression against them. You discuss the terrain, narrow access points to the settlement, the dense woodland that surrounds it. Consider the psychological aspect, how to create an illusion of greater strength, how to sow doubt and hesitation in the minds of the attackers. You recall the stories of Saxon shield walls, the disciplined formations that could withstand even the fiercest Norse onslaughts, the trained warriors and the organized military structure, you can adapt those principles. Fortify the eastern approach, the one most likely to be used by the raiders, creating a bottleneck. You will use the remaining sturdy timbers from the longhouse, along with salvaged shields and even upturned carts, formidable barrier. Your hands, usually accustomed to the gentle rhythm of weaving or tending a garden, and calloused from hauling wood and digging trenches. The smell of sweat and damp earth is a constant companion. You find yourself thinking about the food stores, what little remains. The dried fish, the meager sacks of barley must be protected. You assign tasks with a quiet urgency. Ella and a few others are tasked with digging deeper, wider pits just beyond the main barricade. Brush and branches. These are not merely obstacles. They are traps designed to break the momentum of an attack, to cause confusion and injury. Agnes, with her knowledge of local herbs, is preparing poultices and bandages from the leaves of comfrey and yarrow, a grim necessity for the inevitable injuries. You, in turn, are scavenging for anything that can be used as a weapon. A blacksmith's hammer, its head still heavy and solid, becomes a formidable tool. Discarded scythe, its blade sharpened to a wicked edge, can be wielded with deadly effect. You even consider the beehives still intact, weapon that could be unleashed upon an approaching enemy. The air is thick with the scent of pine needles, damp moss, present subtle aroma of the sea, a constant reminder of the threat that sails upon its waters. At the faces of your companions, their eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. You see the same resolve mirrored in their expressions that you feel within yourself. Longer about simply surviving the aftermath of a raid, it is about actively preventing another, transforming from prey into something more formidable, a collective will to resist. Silence of the aftermath is punctuated by the rustling of leaves, the distant cry of a gull, and the low murmur of your planning. You are building not just a defense, but a statement. The sun dips below the horizon, sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the grim reality of your preparations. The air grows cooler, carrying the damp chill of the coming night. You can almost feel the weight of the approaching dawn, and with it, the potential return of the longships. The fear hasn't vanished entirely. It's a cold knot in your stomach, beneath the surface of your resolve. But it's no longer a paralyzing force. It's a fuel driving you to secure every stake, every weak point, to ensure that if they come again, they will find more than just defenseless villagers. You glance at Agnes, meticulously checking the tension on a tripwire fashioned from rawhide, connected to a pile of loose stones, catches your eye and offers a small, almost imperceptible nod. Ellora is meticulously sharpening another stake, almost meditative. You are ready as you can be, to turn the tide from passive survival to active resistance. The threat remains a shadow on the horizon, but you have woven a tapestry of defiance from the threads of desperation. Turning point, the moment when the instinct to flee is replaced by the will to stand and fight, not for glory, the very continuation of your lives. You know that the next encounter will be different, to the resilience of the human spirit when faced with overwhelming odds. As the stars begin to emerge, clear in the darkening sky, you settle down for a brief rest, the scent of wood smoke and damp earth filling your senses. The sounds of the night are a symphony of rustles and whispers, each one a potential harbinger of doom, but now a signal of your own preparedness. You know that the dawn will bring a new challenge, a test of your carefully laid plans. Could you survive is no longer about luck or chance, but about the choices you make now. In the quiet hours before the storm, you have learned to adapt to improvise, to find strength in unity. The true test, however, is yet to come. Forget what you've learned from period dramas. The truth is far more fascinating. The air, the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, presses in on you. It's the scent of survival, of a world stripped bare of its comforts. You stand at the edge of the clearing, the rough-spun wool of your tunic scratching against your skin, discomfort that now feels like a second skin. The chill of the early morning seeps through your worn leather boots, grounding you. The metallic tang of anxiety on your tongue, a constant companion in these days, the low murmur of voices, hushed and urgent, the drifts from the makeshift palisade your small group has erected. Each splintered log, each sharpened stake, represents a desperate hope. You remember the hushed discussions in the dim light of the longhouse, casting torchings and dancing shadows on the faces of Agnes, Elora, and only, etched with a grim determination that mirrors your own. The dawn is a pale, hesitant grey, promising no warmth, a stark reality of what lies ahead. The distant cry of a crow, sharp and mournful, echoes through the quiet woods, a sound that now carries a chilling premonition. Your hands, calloused from a life of labour, almost imperceptibly as you grip the rough haft of a borrowed spear. This is not a battle for glory, it's a battle for existence. The weight of the past, the echoes of raids on neighbouring settlements, presses down on you. Of the ferocity of the men you are about to face, you can feel the grit of the soil beneath your fingernails, connection to the land you are defending. Day by day, you learn. Agnes, her usually rosy cheeks pale, eyes sharp and unwavering, had laid out the plan. Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of authority, of managing the communal stores and more recently the dwindling defenses. They will come from the river, always do, she stated, her finger tracing a rough map drawn in the dirt. The tide will be with them at dawn, giving them speed. Scouts reported 3 longships sighted yesterday, heading upstream. We anticipate their arrival before the sun is fully risen. Alara, pragmatist, had been sharpening a hunting knife on a smooth, grey stone. Shik was a rhythmic counterpoint to Agnes's words. The western approach is our weakest point, Alara had said. The woods are too dense for a clear line of sight, and the ground is uneven. We'll need to reinforce it. Only Kin will take that flank, keep them from breaking through. Only, a man of few words but immense strength, had simply nodded on the distant tree line. His silence was more reassuring than any lengthy speech. You recall the feel of the coarse wool of your tunic, the slightly musty odour of the straw bedding in the communal dwelling, the taste of the thin, watery stew that was their evening meal, a far cry from the richer fare of earlier, more prosperous times. You remember the smell of the wood smoke clinging to everything, a perpetual reminder of their reliance on the forest. In the air was a constant, a reminder that even the familiar warmth of the hearth offered little solace against the encroaching threat, the rustle of leaves underfoot, the distant bleating of a sheep. These sounds, once mundane, now seemed amplified, each one a potential herald of danger. Still feel the rough texture of the wood, as you helped only, and a few others reinforce the western palisade. The sharp sting of splinters in your hands was a minor inconvenience compared to the gnawing fear in your gut. Hours felling smaller trees, hacking at them with crude axes, the metallic clang echoing through the trees, filled with the scent of freshly cut pine, a sharp, resinous aroma that mingled with the ever-present wood smoke. The ground beneath your feet was a muddy, churned mess, the remnants of recent rain, shown you how to weave branches and smaller logs together, creating a denser, more formidable barrier. Every inch she'd warned, her voice raspy from exertion. Don't let them find a weakness. You remember the taste of the coarse bread and dried meat they shared, rations that fueled their desperate efforts. The sun, when it finally broke through the mist, offered little warmth, illuminating the grim determination on every face. Hear the low grunts of effort as men strained to lift heavy logs, the sharp crack of wood as an axe bit deep. The rough fabric of your trousers chafed your legs, a constant reminder of the hard labor. You recall the cool feel of a river stone Elara had given you to hold for luck, its weight a small comfort in your palm. This is for courage, she'd whispered, her gaze meeting yours, a silent understanding passing between you. You can smell the damp earth, sweat of your own brow, the faint acrid scent of the sharpening oil on Elara's knife. You remember the visual of Agnes, meticulously counting the few remaining arrows, her brow furrowed in concentration. The sound of her voice, steady as she reassured a younger, trembling boy, was a beacon of calm in the rising tide of anxiety. The cold metal of the spearhead, its edges honed to a wicked sharpness, a stark contrast to the worn leather of your own tunic. Day you learn. The historical accounts speak of the Danes, the Norsemen, landing on shores across Britain and Ireland from the late 8th century onwards. In 793 AD, the raid on Lindisfarne Monastery and sacred site sent shockwaves across Europe, a brutal testament to their prowess. This wasn't mere raiding, systematic disruption of life, a terrifying demonstration of power. You realize that the fragmented chronicles, centuries later, often romanticize the ferocity, but fail to convey the sheer terror of facing them. Agnes explaining to only that their longships, the Daesh Drakkar, were marvels of engineering for their time. Open seas and shallow rivers, allowing them to strike deep inland. This adaptability was a key to their success. The spray of the cold sea spray, hear the rhythmic creak of oars, the guttural shouts of the warriors, sends a shiver down your spine. You remember the taste of the brackish water they had to drink on their long voyages, feel of the ship's timber beneath their hands. The smell of tar and salt would have been ever present. Sheer audacity required to cross the North Sea in those open vessels. Today we might undertake with relative ease, but then was a perilous undertaking. Comparison is the sheer nerve it takes for a small, under-equipped team to stand against a technologically superior, organized military force, a David and Goliath scenario played out with axes and spears. The fear is a physical thing, not in your stomach, a tightness in your chest. You can taste it, a bitter, coppery flavor. You can feel the sweat prickling on your skin, laying chill. The sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the chirping birds seem to hold their breath, waiting. Weave of your tunic feels suddenly inadequate, a flimsy barrier against the storm that is about to break. The spear in your hand is both a burden and a source of faint reassurance. Feel the worn leather of your boots gripping the damp earth, a grounding sensation. You can smell the damp, decaying leaves underfoot, sweet scent of pine needles. The distant sound of the river, a low murmur, is a constant reminder of the enemy's approach. Grey light of dawn beginning to filter through the trees, illuminating the clearing, the makeshift defenses, the faces of your companions, etched with a shared unspoken dread. The moment is here, the gauntlet is thrown. Historian has that one period that captures their imagination completely. This is mine, the age of Viking raids, time when the very fabric of settled life could be ripped apart by the roar of dragon-prowed longships and the glint of steel. You've been with Agnes and her small band, learning their desperate struggle against overwhelming odds. you in the thick of it, the air alive with the clash of metal and the guttural cries of battle. Now, the heart of that maelstrom, where survival isn't a hope, but a brutal, unyielding necessity of life, changes as the dawn of this day breaks, not with the gentle chirping of birds, but with the guttural roars of the Northmen. No longer a passive observer, you are a participant. The biting wind whips across the exposed headland, the acrid scent of burning thatch and the metallic tang of spilled blood. Your rough-spun tunic, with the night's dew and your own nervous sweat, clings uncomfortably to your skin. The rough wool scratches, a constant reminder of your vulnerability. In your grip, the familiar weight of the sharpened farming implement feels both clumsy and terrifyingly inadequate against the seasoned weaponry of your attackers. Her usually serene face, a mask of grim determination, stands beside you, her eyes scanning the approaching horde. Her hair, usually neatly braided, is coming undone, strands clinging to her sweat-slick brow. Elara, her younger sister, clutches a crude wooden shield, her knuckles white, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Only the quiet fisherman, his normally jovial demeanor replaced by a steely resolve, readies his harpoon, its barbed point gleaming dully in the weak morning light. A wave of fur and iron crash against your makeshift barricade. You see the desperation in their eyes, but also a practiced ferocity that chills you to the bone. Their horned helmets, though largely a myth in popular culture, are indeed absent. Simple, practical leather caps or bare heads. The sunlight catches the polished surfaces of their mail shirts and the broad blades of their axes. Sickening thud as an axe bites deep into the timber of your defense, splinters flying like shrapnel. Pain shoots up your arm as you parry a wild swing, the impact jarring your teeth. Your training, or rather, by desperate necessity, takes over. You remember Agnes's whispered instructions. Aim for the gaps is strong, but their limbs are not. You duck beneath a sweeping blow, its passage a tangible force against your cheek, and thrust your sharpened tool upwards. The exposed thigh of your attacker, the rough metal scrapes against leather and flesh, drawing a bellow of pain. Air is thick with the cacophony of battle, the clang of steel on steel, the guttural shouts in a tongue you barely comprehend. Of the wounded, it all blends into a terrifying symphony. You see a Viking, his face a mask of blood and fury, axe with immense power, cleaving through the shield of one of your neighbors. The shield splinters and the man stumbles back, arm hanging at an unnatural angle. You feel a surge of adrenaline, a primal urge to protect your own. You shove past Elara, holding her ground, and engage the Viking directly. He turns his attention to you, his eyes burning with a cold. He feints left, then swings right, a powerful, sweeping motion designed to break your guard. You instinctively drop, whistling inches above your head. The ground beneath you is uneven, littered with rocks and the discarded remnants of your defenses. Salt from the nearby sea mingles with the coppery scent of blood and the earthy aroma of churned soil. Agnes, bellays her slight frame, seizes the moment. She lunges forward, not with a weapon, but with a heavy, iron-bound bucket, all her might at the Viking's head. The clang is deafening, and he reels back, momentarily stunned. Opportunistic, brutal defense that characterized survival in these times. It wasn't about glorious duels, any weakness, any distraction. You see only his usually calm demeanor replaced by a fierce protectiveness. Use his harpoon to impale a Viking attempting to flank your position, the barbed head digging deep. His movements are economical, deadly. A warrior by trade, but a man defending his home, his family. Elara, stay behind me! Agnes shouts, strained but firm. She draws a small, wickedly curved knife from her belt, a tool more suited for butchery than combat. It becomes a weapon of last resort. Elara, tears streaming down her face, nods, gripping her shield tighter. She has witnessed horrors no child should ever see, and yet she stands her ground. Resilience that history books often gloss over, the quiet courage of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Reading in the annals of the Lindisfarne raid in 793 AD, how the monks, despite their vows of peace, whatever they had, it was not a glorious victory, but it was resistance. In a desperate struggle with a hulking Northman, his beard matted with sweat and grime. His breath is foul, a vow and something gamey. He's armed with a round shield and a short sword. You parry his thrusts, you impact travelling up your arms. Your hands ache, your muscles scream. You notice a small tear in his mail shirt. Rings have come loose. It's a tiny imperfection, but in this brutal dance, it's an invitation. You feint a jab, his shield high, then quickly bring your weapon low, aiming for that vulnerable spot. The rough metal finds purchase. He cries out, stumbling back. You don't have time to savor the small victory. Another attacker is already upon you. The sheer physicality of it all is exhausting, a constant drain on your dwindling energy. The taste of dust and fear coats your tongue. The tide of the battle begins to shift. The initial ferocity of the Viking assault, while still potent, is met with a desperate defense. The survivors, though fewer in number, have learned. They anticipate the swings, they exploit the openings. Ferocity of cornered animals. You see a Viking fall, his axe clattering on the stones. Desperate cry ripped from his throat, then another. The initial shock has worn off, replaced by a grim determination. The roar that ignited this defense is beginning to burn brighter than the fear. The air, though still thick with the stench of battle, scent the faint sweet aroma of blooming heather on the nearby hills, reminder of the natural world continuing its cycle, indifferent to the human struggle. As the sun climbs higher, shadows across the ravaged landscape, the intensity of the assault begins to wane. The Vikings, their initial wave of aggression blunted by the unexpected and fierce resistance, start to regroup. You see their leader, with a distinctive scar across his left eye, bellowing orders. Not accustomed to such prolonged and costly resistance from a settlement of this size. This wasn't the easy plunder they anticipated. Your small group, battered and bruised, but unbroken, has inflicted a significant price. The ground around you is littered with the fallen, friend and foe. The silence that begins to creep in, broken only by the groans of the wounded, is as unnerving as the preceding roar. Her face, streaked with dirt and blood, surveys the scene. Her eyes, though weary, hold a spark of triumph. She exchanges a brief glance with only. Elara, still clutching her shield, looks around, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. You, too, profound sense of exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that goes beyond physical exertion. You have faced death, and combination of luck, skill, and sheer will, you have endured. The scent of smoke still hangs heavy, but beneath it, subtle shift, the promise of a hard-won reprieve, the raw, visceral experience of this battle. The sheer terror and the unexpected resilience has etched itself into your being. It's a testament to the human capacity for survival lies dormant until tested by the most extreme circumstances. The question remains, however, the cost of this resistance and what awaits those who dared to stand against the storm changes as the immediate threat recedes, but the echoes of the battle linger. The air, once filled with the clamour of combat, now hums with a different kind of tension, the anticipation of what comes next. The survivors, bound by their shared ordeal, begin to tend to their wounded, their movements slow and deliberate. Agnes, ever the pragmatist, starts to assess the damage, her gaze sweeping over the fallen and the shattered defences. The raw courage displayed today is undeniable. Reality of their situation is equally stark. The cost of survival, you realize, is often measured not just in lives lost, profound and permanent changes wrought upon those who remain. The memory of the Viking raid and the unexpected triumph will forever be a part of their story and yours. Never quite capture the texture of daily life in this remarkable era, and nowhere is that more true than in the roar of a Viking raid. You wake up not to the gentle dawn chorus of birds, but to a symphony of groans, the crackle of dying embers and the mournful cry of the wind whistling through shattered timbers. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and baking bread from your small settlement of Lindisfarne, now stings your nostrils with the acrid tang of burnt thatch and something far more metallic, the coppery scent of spilled blood. Still slick with the residue of desperate defense, tremble as you push yourself up from the damp earth. Pun wool of your tunic chafes against raw skin, a constant, painful reminder of the night's terror. You scan the scene, your eyes sleep and fear, darting across the devastated landscape. The familiar shapes of homes and workshops are now twisted skeletal remains. The longhouse, the heart of your community, partially collapsed, its once proud roof timbers splayed like broken ribs. The altar within the sanctuary, only hours before, is overturned, its sacred relics scattered. The silence is the most unnerving thing, a heavy, oppressive blanket that has fallen over the place where life thrummed just yesterday. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer, chatter of children playing, the lowing of cattle, all are gone, replaced by this profound, aching void. You remember the chilling guttural roars of the attackers, the sharp, unyielding bite of steel against wood and bone. The desperate courage of Agnes, her small frame a furious whirlwind as she defended the younger ones. Grim determination etched on Alara's face as she wielded her father's heavy axe. Only the quiet fisherman, the ferocity of a cornered wolf, his usual placid eyes burning with a primal rage. With each passing moment, what has transpired begins to sink in. The initial adrenaline surge, that primal instinct to survive, is slowly ebbing, gnawing exhaustion and a deep, bone-chilling grief. You see figures stir amidst the wreckage, survivors streaked with soot and tears, their bodies bearing the grim testament of the violence. A small group huddled near the partially standing outer wall, their heads bowed. It's Elara, her arm crouched against her chest, dark stains spreading through her tunic. Beside her, Agnes, her face pale and drawn, is murmuring words of comfort, still stained. You make your way towards them, your steps heavy on the debris-strewn ground, and crushed wildflowers rises with each footfall. Alara, you call out, your voice raspy. She looks up, rimmed but holding a flicker of recognition. Are you all right? Alara manages a weak smile, as can be expected, I suppose. This is a grievous wound, but the village healer, bless her soul, managed to bind it. Others now. She gestures with her chin towards a small cluster of figures being ministered to. Here was a true bulwark. She shielded the little ones from the worst of it. Her Agnes looks up, her gaze meeting yours. What we could, she says quietly, her voice trembling. But the sheer ferocity, I've never seen anything like it. A storm, a relentless tide of destruction. She shivers despite the relative warmth of the emerging sun. Old Man Hemlock, he tried to stand his ground. They just overwhelmed him. The memory clearly haunts her, pang of shared sorrow. The brutality of it all, the sheer disregard for human life, a stark contrast to the peaceful rhythms you'd grown accustomed to. With each passing moment, the scope of the loss becomes clearer. Cries of the wounded, the hushed laments of the bereaved, paint a grim tableau. You see the smoke rising from the far side of the settlement, where the Viking longships, dark and predatory, still lie beached, celebrating their bloody victory. The salty tang of the sea, usually a comforting presence, carries a sinister undertone. You notice the absence of familiar faces, the vacant spaces where neighbors once stood. Crafted wooden idols, once adorning the thresholds of homes, lie broken in the mud. The carefully tended herb garden, the healing properties of plants from your grandmother, is trampled and scorched. I discovered in the archives a few years ago a fragment of a monastic chronicle from the north of England, dated to this very period, that described such raids with chilling detail. It spoke of the swiftness of the attacks, the indiscriminate slaughter, sheer terror that gripped the populace. It noted that often the attackers would sail up rivers or along coastlines, terrifying suddenness, their dragon-headed prows slicing through the water like predatory beasts. Lindisfarne in 793 AD, a seminal event, was a brutal awakening for many, stating that even the most sacred and seemingly secure places were vulnerable. This wasn't just about plunder, asserting dominance, about instilling fear. You can feel that fear now, a cold dread that settles deep in your bones, to where only is meticulously sifting through the debris of his small fishing hut. His normally sun-weathered face is etched with a profound sadness. He holds up a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wing broken. "My daughters," he murmurs, his voice thick with emotion. "She carved this for me, would bring me luck on the water." He looks out towards the sea, his gaze distant. They took everything, silver and the livestock, but the memories, the small things that made this place ours. And Agnes, forgotten for a moment, moves to stand beside him. "Only," she says softly, placing a hand on his arm, "we will rebuild. For those who are no longer with us." Only nods slowly, but the conviction in his eyes is faint. Rebuild what? They've taken the heart from this place. With each passing moment, the stark reality of your situation becomes more apparent. Yes, but you are also a witness to utter devastation. The question wasn't just about Trier. If you could survive a Viking raid, but what would be left of you, of your world afterward? The romanticized tales of fierce warriors and epic battles often overlook the grim human cost, the shattered lives, the lingering trauma. You realize that the true test of survival isn't just in the fighting, in the picking up of the pieces. When the storm has passed, the sun, now fully risen, casts long shadows across the ruins, stark reminder that even in the darkest of times, a new day, however difficult, will eventually dawn. Your survival is only the beginning of a long and arduous journey, one that will test your resilience in ways you cannot yet comprehend. Confront the profound question of how to find hope when all seems lost, stepping through time into a world that operated by entirely different rules. Existence was dictated by the sun's arc and the moon's glow, and where survival was a daily, visceral negotiation. Air thick with the acrid tang of smoke and the metallic scent of spilled blood still clung to your skin, a constant, chilling reminder of the recent fury. the dawn of this day, week after the dragon, proud longships had disgorged their terrifying cargo onto the shores of your small settlement. Fragile thing, it was a hesitant blush of rose and gold painting the bruised eastern sky, a stark contrast to the brutal crimson that had stained the earth. Your hands, raw and blistered from wielding a hastily sharpened scythe, trembled as you reached for a rough, spun tunic. The familiar weight of it, a comfort, now felt like a shroud, a testament to the lives lost. The communal hall, once the heart of your village's warmth and shared stories, was a ruin. Charred timbers lay like skeletal fingers against the sky. Smell of burnt thatch and flesh was a phantom presence. You remember the desperate scramble, steel against shield, the guttural roars of the Northmen, and the heart-wrenching cries of your kin. Agnes, of grim determination, had been a whirlwind of fury beside you, wielding a heavy wood axe with astonishing strength. Elara, usually so vibrant and quick with a song, to the wounded in the makeshift infirmary, her brow furrowed with exhaustion and a profound sadness. Even only craftsman, who usually spent his days hammering metal in his smithy, had stood his ground, now a bludgeon in his calloused hands. The memory of their bravery, their defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, flicker of warmth in the cold ashes of your loss. Day by day you learn the immediate aftermath, the raw shock and disbelief. To a gnawing, practical need, the surviving villagers, a mere fraction of your former numbers, now moved with a heavy. The silence was the loudest sound, the absence of laughter, of children's play, of the familiar hum of daily life. Yourself scanning the horizon constantly, a primal instinct to seek out threats, a habit etched deep by the terror. The raiders had taken what they could carry: silver, livestock, anything of value, and departed as swiftly as they had arrived. Landscape of devastation, but they had also left behind a legacy of resilience. Your first task, after ensuring the few remaining wounded were as comfortable as possible, was to begin the grim work of salvaging. You remember the cold clinging to your boots as you helped lay the dead to rest in hastily dug graves. The ritual was somber, whispered against the wind, each name spoken a fresh stab of grief. I discovered in the archives of a later monastery, centuries removed, that this practice of communal burial, even in times of extreme hardship, vital part of maintaining social cohesion and a sense of shared identity among survivors. It was a way of acknowledging the loss, honoring the fallen, and of reaffirming the bonds of those who remained. Then came the practicalities. The longhouse, though damaged, largest remaining structure, its thick wattle and daub walls had offered some protection. Packed roof had been partially consumed by flames. You joined a team, your muscles aching with an unfamiliar weariness, to prop up weakened beams, to salvage any usable materials. Was thick with the smell of smoke and damp ash, but also with the faint, sweet scent of dried herbs that Elara had managed to save from her stores. She had a remarkable ability to find comfort and hope in the smallest things even now. We must rebuild, you know, Elara said as she handed you a water skin. Her fingers were stained with soot and a dark smudge marked her cheek. Eyes held a steely resolve. We cannot let them break us. You nodded, your throat tight. Can we do? We do what we always do. Agnes chimed in, her voice rough. She was trying to mend a torn sailcloth with thick, uneven stitches. We work, we endure. She looked up, her gaze meeting yours. Remember the old ways, the strength our mothers and grandmothers had. They faced famine, disease, hardship we can barely imagine. We have faced this, we will face what comes next. Well, this was the essence of your new reality. that had been merely useful before weaving, farming, crafting were now paramount. The meager stores of grain, miraculously untouched by the fire, were rationed with meticulous care. Every seed was precious, every drop of water accounted for. You spent hours sifting through the ashes of what had been, searching for anything that could be repurposed. A bent iron pot, a shard of pottery, a few surprisingly intact tools. Each find was a small victory against the overwhelming sense of loss. Changed as you learned to adapt. Mornings were dedicated to the most physically demanding tasks: clearing, repairing whatever edible roots and berries remained in the surrounding woods. The fear of further raids lingered, never quite dissipated, so patrols were established, sentinels posted on the highest vantage points, spent gathered around a small, carefully managed fire, sharing what little food you had, recounting the day's work, and, most importantly, planning for the morrow. One evening, as the embers glowed a soft orange, you found yourself sitting with only meticulously sharpening a crude spearhead, the rhythmic rasp of stone on metal, a surprisingly soothing sound. "Best bellows," he said, his voice low, "and the iron we had saved for the plowshares." He sighed, a deep, weary sound, "to replace. We will help you only," you assured him. "We will all help." He looked at you. His eyes, usually so keen and observant, were clouded with a deep sorrow. "You know, I always thought our walls were strong enough, that our position, Lind, would keep us safe." He shook his head. "We were too complacent. We relied on the old ways, the old defenses, that the world is always changing. The traders from the south, they warned us of these Northmen, them little mind." This was a crucial lesson, the importance of adaptability and being aware of external threats resonates even today in our interconnected world. You recall a particular research moment, fragmented accounts from the time, that revealed the devastating impact of such raids on the economic fabric of a region. Immediate losses immense, but the disruption to trade routes and agricultural production could cripple a community for years. The Vikings, while often portrayed as mere plunderers, were also skilled navigators and traders, were often strategic, aimed at destabilizing established powers and seizing control of valuable resources. The raid on your settlement, you realized, was not just an isolated act of violence, but a ripple in a much larger, the more complex historical tide. The days blurred into a cycle of arduous work and quiet reflection. You learned to conserve energy, to appreciate the simple act of a shared meal, a moment of quiet conversation. The grief was still present in your chest, but it was no longer paralyzing. It had been transmuted into a quiet determination, a fierce protectiveness for those who remained. You had survived the storm, and now, amidst the wreckage, you were learning to build again, painstaking brick, beam by salvaged beam. The future was uncertain, a vast, uncharted territory, but you would face it together. Lessons of the past, the strength of your community, and the unyielding will to live. As the sun dipped below the horizon, weary shadows across the scarred landscape, you knew that tomorrow would bring more of the same. More work, more planning, more quiet resilience. The path ahead was long, and the scars of the raid would remain, etched not only on the land, but on your very souls. But in the shared gaze of your fellow survivors, in the steady rhythm of your collective effort, just the aftermath of destruction, but the nascent seeds of a new beginning, a testament to the enduring human spirit. Quiet promise that life, in its most fundamental form, would find a way to bloom again. I've studied paint a picture that's both more mundane and more extraordinary than the sagas suggest. just the clash of steel, but the quiet, persistent hum of survival, the grit and ingenuity that allowed communities to endure. Part 22 of my journey into the warrior's age. Terrifying descent of the Norsemen upon the coastal settlements of Northumbria around the turn of the 9th century focuses on the hard-won lessons in resilience. We've seen the initial shock, the brutal efficiency of the raiders, and the immediate struggle for survival. Now, we delve into the aftermath, into the skills and the mindset that allowed the people of these ravaged lands to rebuild, to adapt, and ultimately to persevere. Perspective shifts when you move beyond the immediate terror of the raid and consider the long, arduous process of recovery. Chaos, the burning longhouses, the scattered remnants of a once thriving community. These are the dramatic snapshots. Measure of survival lies in the days, weeks, and months that follow. You wake up not to the shrill cry of alarm, but to the gnawing emptiness in your stomach and the acrid scent of smoke that still clings to the damp air. Your hands, accustomed to the comforting weight of a plowshare or the smooth texture of woven wool, raw and blistered from hauling timber and clearing debris. The vibrant greens of the fields are muted by ash, and the familiar sounds of laughter and song are replaced by the murmur of worried voices and the rasp of shovels against scorched earth. Yourself in the spring of 867 AD, a year after the devastating raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne, which sent ripples of fear and destruction across the coastline. You are one of the few who remain. You are a refugee from a neighboring settlement seeking shelter and a chance to start anew. The immediate priority isn't revenge. Sustenance. The stored grain, if any survived, is likely spoiled or looted. The livestock, the backbone of any agrarian society, has been scattered or slaughtered. Your knowledge of foraging becomes paramount. You remember the elder, old man Sinric, the edible roots and berries in the woods bordering the settlement, even as the summer sun beat down. Now, those memories are your lifeline. You learn to identify the bitter tang of sorrel, the subtle sweetness of wild garlic, the starchy comfort of certain tubers. The taste is a far cry from the hearty stews and freshly baked bread of before, fills your belly and keeps the gnawing hunger at bay. Perspective shifts when you realize that survival isn't just about finding food, it's about rebuilding community. The communal spirit and loss must be rekindled. You see the women, their faces etched with grief, but their hands steady, salvaged materials. Agnes, a skilled weaver whose loom was reduced to splinters, meticulously mending torn tunics with salvaged threads, her brow furrowed in concentration. Elara, usually known for her quick wit, quiet force, organizing the younger ones to collect firewood, her voice calm and reassuring. You join them, hands stained with the dark earth, as you help clear the foundations of the longhouse that was the heart of your community. Damp earth and decaying wood is potent, but beneath it, there's the faint, hopeful scent of new growth. Recall a conversation with a traveling peddler who passed through last summer before the raid. He spoke of the Roman road network in some areas and how it facilitated trade and communication. Now, you understand the importance of those ancient arteries are overgrown and neglected. You and a few others decide to try and clear a section of the track leading to the next settlement, establish contact, and perhaps trade for seeds or tools. The journey is fraught with peril. The woods are dense, and the possibility of encountering straggling raiders or desperate brigands is ever present. The rustling of leaves, the snap of a twig, every sound heightens your senses, your heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. texture of the bark of the oak trees you lean against for support, wind that whips through the skeletal branches. These sensations are amplified by your constant vigilance. Discovered in the archives of a small monastic library, painstakingly preserved by monks who themselves had faced similar trials, but account from a survivor detailing the meticulous process of rebuilding. It spoke of the importance of understanding the land, which soils were best for certain crops, of the subtle signs that indicated the presence of clean water. This wasn't just brute strength, it was a deep, intimate knowledge of the natural world honed through generations. You, too, are learning this. You observe the patterns of the birds, the direction of the prevailing winds. The moss grows on the north side of the remaining stone walls. This knowledge, once considered common sense, elevated to the status of vital intelligence. Your perspective shifts when you consider the psychological impact. Another raid is a constant shadow. Every distant sound, every unfamiliar sail on the horizon, a jolt of adrenaline through you. Yet, you also witness a remarkable capacity for adaptation. The skills that were once secondary, the ability to tie a secure knot, to fashion a rudimentary fishing net from salvaged cord, a fire with flint and steel, even when your hands are numb with cold. These are now the skills that define success. The stories of the Anglo-Saxon shield wall, a testament to organized defense. While a full shield wall is a distant memory, mutual protection remains. You and your fellow survivors take turns keeping watch, your eyes scanning the familiar coastline, forever altered by the violence it has witnessed. The taste of the brackish water you drink from a hastily dug well is a constant reminder of your precarious situation, but the shared effort, the knowledge that you are not alone, provides a different kind of nourishment. Find yourself in conversation with a grizzled man named Edric, his face a roadmap of hardship. They took everything. He rasps, his voice rough as unpolished stone. But they couldn't take the earth beneath our feet. To stand upon it, he shows you how to sharpen a crude spearhead from a piece of salvaged iron, sound echoing in the quiet of the dawn. We learn to be like the willow, he continues, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Bend, do not break. This philosophy, this quiet determination, is the true legacy of the warrior's age. It's not just about fighting, enduring. The rough wool of your mended tunic chafers your skin, a constant reminder of the loss, of the resourcefulness that allows you to carry on. The documents I unearthed, personal letters and official decrees from the period, speak of a shift in societal focus. Emphasis moved from the grand pronouncements of kings to the practicalities of daily survival. The skills of the farmer, the craftsman, these became as vital, if not more so, than the prowess of the warrior. You are living proof of this transformation. Of the raid has stripped away the veneer of comfort and exposed the raw, unyielding core of human resilience. Learning to ration your meager supplies, to mend rather than replace, a shared purpose that transcends individual fear. The lingering scent of wood smoke, once a symbol of destruction, represents the warmth of a rekindled hearth, a beacon of hope in the encroaching twilight. As the days turn into weeks, first tentative shoots of green begin to push through the scorched earth. You understand that survival is an ongoing process, negotiation with a world that has been irrevocably changed. The lessons learned are etched not just in your mind, fabric of your being. You are no longer the person you were before the raid. You are stronger, more resourceful, and more deeply connected to the land and to your fellow survivors. The memories of the terror remain, tempered by the quiet triumph of perseverance. The path ahead is uncertain, marked by the scars of the past, but you walk it with a newfound understanding of what it truly means to endure. The rhythm of your breath slows, becoming more measured, steady as you absorb these profound lessons of the warrior's age. This is the foundation upon which a new future will be built by painstaking brick. As you settle in tonight, let me transport you to a world both alien and achingly familiar, with a salt spray-kissed weathered faces, and the clang of steel was a lullaby for the brave and a death knell for the unprepared. Walked through the ashes, felt the tremor of fear, and understood the desperate scramble for survival. Now, our journey begin to glow with the quiet wisdom of hindsight. We must confront the stark, unvarnished truth. Have survived a Viking raid? Forget the romanticized sagas. This was a brutal, visceral struggle for existence. A crucible that forged heroes and crushed the ordinary. Your chances, statistically speaking, were not in your favor. Becomes your teacher, and the lessons learned in the aftermath of the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD. The devastating attacks on coastal communities across England and Francia are harsh indeed. Imagine yourself not as a detached observer, but as one of the souls caught in the maelstrom. The initial shock would be a physical blow, a deafening roar of terror and confusion. The air, moments before filled with the familiar scent of peat smoke and baking bread, would suddenly reek of burning timber, spilled blood, tang of fear. Your senses, honed by generations of agrarian life, would be overwhelmed. The shouts of your neighbors, comforting, would transform into screams of agony. The sight of the longships, those sleek, dragon-prowed predators, would sear itself into your memory, a vision of ravenous doom. Consider the physical toll. If you were a farmer, your hands, accustomed to the gentle pull of the plow, would be ill-equipped for the brute force needed to wield a crude spear or even a heavy club. Developed through tilling fields, might offer some resilience, the explosive power and owned dexterity of a trained warrior. Even if you managed to escape the initial onslaught, pursuit would be relentless. The Vikings, particularly the Norsemen from Denmark and Norway, their stamina and their ferocity, they were accustomed to long voyages, to battling harsh elements, and to fighting with a desperate ferocity born of their culture and their faith or lack thereof. In the eyes of the Christian chroniclers, delve into the specifics of survival. If you were a man of fighting age, best hope lay in being part of the village's rudimentary defense. Perhaps you were a fisherman, your arms strong from hauling nets, of the coast invaluable for navigating escape routes. Or perhaps you were a smith, your strength and familiarity with metal offering a chance to fashion a makeshift weapon. Discovered in the archives of Canterbury a fragmented account detailing the defense of a small settlement near the Kent coast in the early 9th century, of men armed with little more than sharpened farming implements and sheer desperation, a raiding party for a crucial hour, allowing women, children, and the elderly to flee into the dense woodlands. This hour, stand, was often the difference between life and death. If you were a woman, survival often depended on a different set of skills and circumstances. The accounts often highlight the plight of women captured during raids, their fates varied and often grim. However, all women were passive victims, many, like the women of the Anglo-Saxon settlements, responsible for the evacuation of the vulnerable. I found a reference in a monastic chronicle from the late 8th century describing how the women of a coastal community, upon hearing the war horns, immediately gathered the young children and the infirm, leading them towards the safety of the hinterlands, their knowledge of hidden paths and sheltered coves their greatest weapon. Agnes, whose story I pieced together from scattered legal documents and oral traditions, is said to have hidden her family in a hollowed-out oak tree, a secret place known only to her, and her ancestors remained silent for 3 days while the Vikings scarred the surrounding countryside. Her ability to remain calm, to trust her instincts, the natural landscape, was her shield. The food you ate, the clothes you wore, the very structure of your dwelling, all played a role. If you lived in a sturdy stone building, like some of the monastic communities, had a chance to barricade yourselves within. The monks of St. Cuthbert's on Lindisfarne, despite their initial terror, to retreat to the safety of their inner sanctum, protecting some of their precious relics and manuscripts. Their survival, however, testament to their fortified structure and their religious devotion, sometimes afforded them a degree of respect from certain Viking leaders who were superstitious or sought specific treasures. Majority living in simple wattle and daub huts, structures offered little protection against the flames and the fury of the raiders. Smell of burning thatch would have been a terrifying harbinger of doom. Your clothing, likely wool or linen, defense against a sword or an axe. The texture of your rough-spun tunic against your skin, the weight of your woolen cloak. As you huddled in fear, food scarcity would become an immediate concern if your stores were destroyed or looted. Were not just warriors, they were also opportunistic plunderers. They would have taken your livestock, your grain, metalwork of anything of value. The taste of ash and despair would have been a constant companion. Experience becomes your teacher, and the historical record, though often biased and incomplete, reveals a stark truth. Majority of people caught in a Viking raid did not survive in the way we might imagine. They were killed, enslaved, forced to flee their homes, their lives irrevocably altered. The sheer speed and brutality of these attacks were designed to shatter resistance and instill terror. Imagine the internal monologue, desperate prayers, the primal urge to flee, the agonizing decisions about who to save or if to save anyone at all. Sensibilities, your ingrained sense of safety and order, would be utterly useless. You would be stripped bare, not just of your possessions, but of your illusions of control. The key to survival, if you were fortunate enough, in a combination of factors being in the right place at the right time, practical skills that could be adapted to combat or evasion, and exhibiting an extraordinary level of courage or cunning. Elara, whose story I found referenced in a collection of Welsh laws, described as having disguised herself as a boy and joined a group of fleeing villagers, her knowledge of the local herbs allowing her to forage for sustenance during their arduous journey into the mountains, and her ability to adapt were her lifelines. So, as you drift off to sleep, contemplate this. The world of the Vikings was not a stage for heroic battles fought by invincible champions. It was a world of ordinary people, extraordinary, terrifying circumstances. Your chances of surviving a Viking raid were slim. The brutal efficiency of these warriors and the vulnerability of the societies they targeted still resonate, a reminder of the fragility of peace and the enduring power of human resilience. Dawn approaches. Remember that the lessons from these ancient encounters are not just about the past, enduring strength that lies within us, even when faced with the unimaginable. Drift back to an age when the very concept of normal was radically different. You are not merely a listener tonight, a phantom observer in the flickering firelight of a long, vanished world. Breathe is thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and the ever-present tang of salt carried on the sea breeze. The sounds that fill your ears are not the hum of technology, but the lowing of cattle, the distant bleating of sheep, thud of a blacksmith's hammer, and the murmur of voices speaking a language that, while recognizably ancestral, ear. This is the world we've explored, a world teetering on the precipice of chaos, where the unexpected could shatter the fragile peace of a lifetime in a matter of hours. In the footsteps of those who faced the fury of the Norsemen, felt the chilling dread that accompanied the distant cry of a lookout, and understood the desperate scramble for survival that followed. We've seen how the seemingly ordinary, a strong wall, a well-hidden store of grain, a communal spirit could mean the difference between life and death. You've felt the grit of the earth beneath your bare feet as you helped fortify the palisades, sting of sweat in your eyes as you worked alongside your neighbors, and the gnawing anxiety that shadowed every waking moment blur into weeks. You find yourself settling into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the seasons, a stark contrast to the unpredictable nature of Viking incursions. You wake with the first hint of dawn, chill of the morning air seeping through the woven reeds of your dwelling's walls. Spun wool of your tunic scratches against your skin, a familiar discomfort that you no longer consciously register. Burning peat, acrid yet comforting, fills your small home. Outside, the village is already stirring. You can hear Elara calling to her children, her voice a melodic lilt that carries across the dew-kissed fields. You step out, misting in the cool air, and join the communal task of tending the communal livestock. The lowing of the cattle is a deep, resonant sound that vibrates through the ground. You run your hands over the coarse, warm hide of a cow, a warm puff against your palm. The taste of yesterday's meager meal, a thick, grainy porridge made from barley, still lingers on your tongue, a reminder of the constant need for vigilance in securing provisions. You exchange a few words with Agnes, her face etched with the wariness of constant watchfulness, but her eyes hold a spark of resilience. Voice night, she remarks, her voice low. A good sign, perhaps. You nod, but the unease remains. Also means swift passage for the longships. You remember the hushed whispers of the previous raid. In the eyes of those who had lost everything, the sheer brutality, the swiftness of the attack, indelible mark on the collective memory of the community. I discovered in the fragmented chronicles of the Lindisfarne Priory, sacked in 793 AD, that the monks were caught entirely unawares, their sacred space desecrated, and their treasures plundered. Vulnerability, this sudden eruption of violence into a peaceful existence, is what we must internalize. To the village elder, a man named Only, who is meticulously sharpening a flint knife. His movements are economical, his focus absolute. He catches your eye and offers a curt nod. Sharpen what you can, he says. His voice, raspy with age, is worth more than a strong arm. When the horns blow, he's referring to the signal horns, the chilling, resonant blasts that would send the village into a frenzy of preparation. You recall the fear that gripped you the last time those horns sounded, the frantic rush to gather what little you could carry, the desperate hope that your hiding place would remain undiscovered. The sheer terror of those moments is a visceral memory, sensation that can still send a shiver down your spine. You remember the smell of burning thatch, the screams that echoed through the night, the acrid smoke that stung your eyes and choked your lungs. The Vikings' distinctive horned helmets, though historically inaccurate, persists for a reason. The sheer alienness of their appearance were not simply raiders, they were a force of nature, unpredictable tempest that could sweep through a community and leave it shattered. The sheer scale of their voyages, oceans in their iconic longships, often propelled by a combination of oar and sail, is a testament to their maritime prowess. Their ships, built with a shallow draft, allowed them to navigate rivers and approach coastal settlements with terrifying speed. The fact that most people unprepared and untrained in warfare would likely perish or be enslaved is the stark reality we must acknowledge. As you settle into night, let me transport you to a world both alien and achingly familiar, where the resilience of the human spirit was tested against the relentless tide of external threats. You've seen the meticulous preparations, the shared labor, the quiet determination that permeated your temporary existence, felt the weight of responsibility, the constant undercurrent of anxiety, the profound sense of community that arose from shared vulnerability. You've learned that survival was not just about physical strength, adaptability, resourcefulness, and an unwavering will to endure. The intricate patterns woven into the fabric of your tunic, crafted tools you use, structure of your dwelling, all speak to a deep understanding of material culture and a profound connection to the land. Simple act of preserving food through smoking or salting required knowledge passed down through generations. This ingrained knowledge, this practical wisdom, was the bedrock of their survival. Never quite capture the visceral reality of living under such a constant threat. They record the battles, the plunder, political shifts, but they rarely convey the pervasive fear, the moments of profound despair, the quiet acts of courage that defined everyday life. You've experienced a glimpse of that reality, a powerful reminder of how far we've come and how fragile the peace we often take for granted can be. That most people couldn't survive is not meant to instill despair, to foster a deeper appreciation for the present and a renewed respect for the tenacity of our ancestors. Whisper from the past, encouraging you to sleep soundly, but wisely, carrying the lessons of survival into your dreams. The leaves outside, a soft, soothing sound that lulls you into a deeper sense of peace. Rest now, the echoes of history guide you to a night of tranquil slumber, perhaps with dreams of resilience and enduring strength.